how's that for an view? All right. Good day,
G'day. How much time you got for me today?
mate. I've I'm sort of self-employed, so I could probably go for 2 hours at the max.
All right. Yeah, I predicted this would probably go. I got a whole lot of things I'd like to talk about. I'm looking through your articles and your videos. About 1 hour,
Yeah,
one
cool.
hour, 2 hours was what I got as well. So that's
Yeah,
good.
that works. That works for me. I've got a cup of tea, so caffeine will help me.
All right. First of all, I'm sorry if you feel like I've misrepresented you in our first interview. You were had a complaint that you felt that I edited it a bit too much.
Yeah, I would have liked to have had the whole thing up somewhere, and then had that version edited. But I don't get too upset over spilt milk. It's not the end of the world.
Well, the reason I did that is because it was a 2 hour conversation and I wanted to short it down for my audience. So I think because you have a habit of I think going on for a bit too long. So
Okay.
would you mind if if that happens again? Mind if I just interrupt you abruptly? If
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to change tacks, sure. Feel free to pull me up or whatever.
and just to make sure when we finish this video, I'll probably edit it tonight and I'll send you a private link and you can have
Yep.
the first look at it and you can tell me if you're happy or not with it before I put it on. If you want anything left out or
Yep.
not left
I
out.
would appreciate that. That sounds great.
So the way I've got it set up is three sections I want to talk about: your involvement in Antifa, the way the media's been treating you, and I want to throw out some right-wing ideologies, talking points, and see what you think about them.
Yeah, yeah, that would be good. I was hoping to. I know that you're sort of interviewing me, but I would also like to sort of chat. How you came to think what you think, and your political journey a little bit. But yeah, so maybe we can do that while we're sort of talking about some of the right wing ideas.
Okay. I've noticed that. No, so how do I? Do you know how to make it in Google Hangouts so the thing's share screen?
So the thing is, what? Sorry.
So it switches to whoever's talking. Right now, I've only got.
Oh, yeah, that seemed to happen automatically when I've done it before. What the way I've done it when it switches automatically is through YouTube, and you go. I think it's in live streaming or whatever. Create a new event, and then the Hangout happens through there. Rather, are you just sort of using this chat and then recording the desktop?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think to have that automatic, if you want to go to your YouTube channel or just do a quick Google on how to set up a new event, and then you send me another invite, it records to Google, but it also seems to automatically do that swapping based on who's talking.
Yeah, that'll be great. I think that'll be worth for that just for the hassle. Will that stream
Uh,
it live?
uh, it doesn't make it public. So you go for options. You just make it unlisted or private, but then the streaming of the stream is uploaded onto YouTube, but not necessarily public if you change those options.
Right. I might just do that. Sorry. It's the first
All
time
right,
I'm
no
using
worries.
this.
All good. Just I guess I'll hear from you in a few minutes.
Let me just double check. There's nothing in Google Hangouts I might have missed out. Are you sure that's the only way?
That's the way I know how to do it, but who knows?
All right. I'll come back to you. Mm. Hmm. Let's try again. I think I got that wrong.
Hello?
I couldn't get it working. So I'm gonna try. But I found out there's a way of doing it in Google Hangouts without.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be working though. It says like simply
One,
click on
two.
the user you want to prioritize and then Google Hangouts will seem. I might have to just switch it back and forth manually. It sucks.
Yeah, you sure? I could send you a screenshot of the process I've used if that might help. You don't want to try that?
It shouldn't be that hard. Like I don't want to do it through YouTube because I need like another software to connect it.
Okay.
Switch it. If you ever hang out with 3 more people, it seems to only happen when there's 3 more people though. Maybe I can log in. I can get like a third person to log in from my other computer, and then it should switch automatically. Maybe.
Yeah, that could be a solution.
That sounds so retarded though.
Yeah, have a adjudicator, a silent adjudicator.
Alright, no. I'm just going to click it manually. I've got my mouse here. I can just do it like this.
All
All
right,
right.
sweet as.
Let me just get up my notepad I was using.
Yep.
How you feeling? Chilled?
Yeah, good. Just had a big day. Did a few errands. Did some writing. How about yourself?
Um, same. I didn't do writing though. I slept. Had a little nap. It's getting really hot here. I don't know what it's like in Brisbane, but
It's hot for you Victorians, huh? You guys don't know what hot is.
yeah, we don't know. And when we do get like mid-30s, it's hard. But you guys,
Yeah.
you probably got that under your hat.
Yeah, mate. We're talking about the 40s sometimes.
All right. Well, I'm gonna start. All right. So I'm here with Shane.
G'day. Hello.
Now, for those guys who don't know my channel, I've had Shane on. I talked to him last year, and we had not so much of a debate, more of a discussion about our two ideologies. I was representing anarcho-capitalism, and you were representing, what would you call it? Anarchism? Communism?
Yeah, I would say anarcho-communism.
Anarcho-communism. Now, I think we both walked away from that a little disappointed with each other. Probably we didn't connect at all. But
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird when two opposing ideologues don't seem to always get along really well.
well, yeah, it never happens to me.
No.
But to my surprise, a year later, I found you at one of the many Australian Patriot page I follow, just giving it up, telling it. You had it on the newspaper. You were on the newspaper saying that you were giving up on Antifa there.
Yeah. I think it's a heinous totalitarian ideology that glorifies violence, and yeah, right. Looking back on it now, I think it's an appalling mindset. It's a very, I mean, we'll delve into that, but yeah, I look back on it now with just shaking my hand, cringeworthy, like someone might look back on footage of themselves drunk or something.
Well, was it our debate? Were you like thinking about the debate and you're going, oh, geez, I must read some Mises and Rothbard in I see the
Yeah,
light.
it was a debate. I was like, oh, you know what? I reckon I'm wrong. No, people don't ever change their mind based on debates, man. But um, what is are you asking the question? What was the process or how I got out of that?
We'll get to that really shortly, but
All right,
I want to say
no worries.
congratulations on like leaving and seeing the light. I guess I had you written off. I was thinking this guy's lost, but you surprised me in changing it around, and I'm very thankful that you are actually public about it. That you're speaking out against it now, because I think most people who leave Antifa or leave the far left just like disappear.
Yeah,
And
because you know it's like being an apostate of any religion. It's a lot of people who have left that stuff or who were severely bullied feel very scared about speaking out about their experience. So it's a lot easier for them to just kind of, all right, that was weird. I'm going back to the real world.
yeah, so I appreciate you coming out and speaking out against it. It's valuable, I think, for other people who might be going through, and for
It
future.
is. It is. I got a lot of messages from people who used to be in the far left and people who used to be in the far right messaging me. So even though I got a lot of hate for it, I think it's worth it for those people, and also people who were ex-lovers or ex-friends of people who saw people become extremists.
All right, so let's start. How did you join Antifa? Like, what got you into it in the first place?
Well, I started. It all sort of escalated from starting to go to protest rallies. I was very concerned about uh, the Western intervention in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit irrationally concerned. I was like, oh, nuclear war is going to happen. You know, I think my psychology is very susceptible to, yeah, kind of irrational fear. And so I started going to these rallies and stuff, trying to, you know, relate to the campaign to stop that. And then through that experience, I started to meet anarchists at the Black Rose Bookshop in Newtown.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, my normal friends, say in the stand-up comedy world, you know, they'll go, oh, here's Hunter just talking on about politics again, and they'll tune out. But for me, it was like, oh, these people are about my age and they're really interested in politics. And then over time, you know, maybe the course of say 6 months to a year, by osmosis, I slowly sort of got subsumed by the ideology, and before I knew it, I was an avatar for dead philosophers that I never read properly. And yeah, crazy. I started wearing all black, and you know, at the yeah, you really show your individuality and how free you are by all dressing in black. Um,
I remember
and
before in our debate, you were saying you used to be a libertarian and an ANCAP, and then you moved on to being a far left.
that's correct. Yeah.
So, did this Syria thing before or after you were an ANCAP?
Pardon me.
Was the Syrian protest, was this before or
This
after?
was sort of on the cusp. Well, I sort of had the libertarian leanings because you know, I sort of became an adult around the GFC. You know what I mean? And so for me, that was the big political issue, as well as the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And for me, in all the public discourse, Ron Paul seemed to make the most sense to me.
Right.
And so I was sort of yeah, caught up on, sort of went down that philosophical route of sort of libertarianism and then anarcho-capitalism through the online stuff. And then yeah, it would have been about 2012, I suppose, that those ways of thinking about the world were slowly eroded through the process of hanging out with these anarchists. And yeah, I think it's interesting to note how powerful your social environment and peer group can be in shaping the way you think about the world and even yourself.
So it went
You know,
from
we're
like
social animals.
it went from apolitical to libertarian slash ANCAP to left, far left. And what would you call yourself now?
Um, I would. What would I call myself now? I mean, I've been posting some videos calling myself the radical centrist, but I think I'm an extreme moderate now. Is what I am.
Extreme moderate, extreme centrist,
No,
rational
but
skeptics.
I think there are two sides of every debate, at least two sides. There could be billions of sides of every debate, but I think now I'm a bit more humble, and that I know that I don't know enough to have hardcore convictions that I might take on any label. I'm still very interested in politics. I'm still a bit of political animal, but in my process of sort of, figuring out what the hell happened to me in that journey, I started reading a lot about cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And then I've come to the point of realizing I don't even know how to think properly yet. So I'm sort of more at the moment learning about psychology and philosophy.
So you're not really sure where you stand. You just call yourself a centrist?
Yeah. I think like a skeptic is what I am. Yeah.
I can put you in a side right now. Like, are you for or against the free market?
I I think there's pros and I think there's cons.
Well,
so
overall,
you know what I mean? I'm sort of I feel a bit more that my flag is a yin yang symbol.
Doesn't help. All right, let's move on from there then. So, why did you leave Antifa? What made you wake up to it?
Yeah, it was a slow process. So, I was sort of involved with the Antifa, which was sort of an offshoot from the anarchist subculture I was hanging out with. So the anarchists would sort of have a few kind of, I guess, fronts. You could maybe describe it with that language, where they would sort of go, oh, well, we're the anti-poverty network. Oh, this is Antifa. This is the queer liberation group. But in all these groups, there's a subculture that has all the members of each sort of group are hanging out in. And it was sort of when I got disillusioned with that subculture. I mean, a lot of things happened, and I saw a lot of kind of cannibalistic ways members were persecuted. I was persecuted, but that still wasn't enough for me to question the ideology. That's how intense belief structures can be. It was only when I started to allow myself to start to watch videos of social justice warrior cringe videos. I saw these popping up in my YouTube feed, and I was hesitant to look at them because you don't want to look at things that challenges your beliefs.
This is like wrecked feminist videos kind of things. Is that what you mean?
That kind of style, yeah. And then I was able to watch it, and then I could kind of see that these people in America, are verbatim speaking in the same style as all the anarchists in Sydney and Brisbane.
Huh.
And so that kind of it's like there's an algorithm or a demon that's possessed them, and they're all speaking the same rhetoric.
Yeah.
Yep. It's like there's a computer program, and they're having an algorithmic response. And I think
you were doing that as well when we were talking in a debate. Were you aware of that?
I'll have to go back and look at it, but I'm sure
you were talking
I have seen some
private property rights. Like you were very focused on that issue and exploitation. Do you still feel about that way?
I think there can be elements of oppression within the global market or whatever, but I also feel that it's wrong to think that the only thing that's happening is oppression. I think there are elements of a meritocracy that happen in society, and I was blind to that. So what happens with ideologues, right, is they take one thing that's true some of the time and they extrapolate and they make it the universal. So for example, the mythology around, we live in a rape culture and all this stuff, what they do is they take the reality that sometimes some people who are raped aren't believed because there's the person who did it, they don't want to believe that they did it, and things like that. But then they extrapolate and they make that the universal. So what happens with the sort of, look at this one example where someone wasn't paid properly on time, and okay, well that's true, and now I will extrapolate and make that a universal. So I no longer believe in that it's solely built on oppression.
I think the far left, though, when they see these social justice cringe fest, they separate themselves from them. They call that identity politics, but they believe in more of the classical Marxist economic kind of arguments of wage labor, and they distance themselves from that.
Yes, that's a correct observation. People will do the sort of no true Scotsman fallacy. Oh, that's not real anarchism. That's not real Marxism.
Right.
But what happened is, at first I felt like, well, I'm still an anarchist. I'm still left wing, but I'm against this kind of PC authoritarianism and identity politics, and that I'm all about class. I had that mindset as I was coming out of it, and then I kind of got exposed to a few more ideas. Pardon me, and then I realized that this identity politics is actually a mutation of classical Marxism.
Right.
Classical Marxism has the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy
Mm-hmm.
between workers and bosses. So, and then they've turned that and racialized it and genderfied it, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's what's created identity politics. But the same mechanic of a black and white thinking and the same sort of resentment still exists within that paradigm of their so-called class analysis, where, yeah,
Yeah, that was Marxist historical dialecticism, material dialecticism, like the
yeah,
bastardized
this,
form of Hegelian dialectics.
yes,
Oppressor and the
that's
oppressed.
right.
And they do the switcheroo with the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and replacing it with whatever you want: male, female, cis, transgender, white, blacks.
And it's actually a really insidious ideology because there's so many layers of different ways you can feel oppressed. That's given more people ways of latching onto this ideology. So you can be a middle class or upper middle class or a ruling class person, but if you tick one of those boxes of victimhood, this ideology applies to you.
Right.
So I think that's why it's so popular and so easy for people to latch onto.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and it's hard if if you don't know what Marxism is and it's just new to you. It sounds kind of convincing, like classical Marxism did. So I'm assuming from your past videos, the biggest influence that helped you on this journey was Jordan Peterson. Is that right?
That's correct. Jordan Peterson has given me so much to think about in terms of politics, but also in terms of how I relate to my family and my friends and how I organize my own life. And I feel that he's introduced me to whole layers of thinking and abstractions of reality that I couldn't see before. Because one of the things that happens with the anarchist postmodern ethos is because you believe that society is only predicated on oppression, and you can only see historically, the Marxist thing of the history of the world is the history of class struggles. That mindset and that belief means that you can't look at any tradition that might be good about Western civilization or other cultures, and then some of the emerging truths or benefits to those structures. So I feel that now that I'm no longer in that mindset, I'm able to look at, I never thought that I would be able to have any appreciation for Christianity, for example.
Go on. Go on.
Yeah, and now that I am able to think about those stories, not in a literal sense, but in a, see, as a belief structure, Christianity and Buddhism and all these things, unlike a lot of political ideologies, like Marxism, fascism, anarchism, feminism, those religions, even though they're not scientific, they have some emphasis on the internal realm. This idea of sin, this idea of delaying gratification, this idea of
you sound just like him. It feels like I'm watching a podcast from Jordan Peterson right now. This is amazing. I didn't think you'd be this kind of person a year from when we were talking about. Wow, I think he's worth every penny. Every how much is he worth now? Quite a lot.
Yeah.
So, I guess you said in your article, the radical left, Antifa, presents itself as being about compassion and empathy, but it's a Trojan horse. All conversations are about entitlement and rights, not responsibility. When these people talk about freedom, they really mean freedom from responsibility. I think that's a really nice quote. Do you want to expand on that one at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel that, the way they have the moral justification for their resentment and aggression is through, we're doing this because we empathize with the victims of racism. And so much to the point that they'll probably brainwash themselves, they do it. But I think, the psychology of when you do something you shouldn't do, you'll create a justification for it. So let's say, this might not apply to you personally, but I drank too much on the weekend and I really shouldn't have any drinks today. But then, but it's your friend's birthday, and so you'll find an excuse to do what you want to do. And I feel like a lot of the mechanisms of this ideology allow people for a moral justification to be pathologically violent and aggressive towards people. And I feel that there's some really dark characters who have problems with their own psychology, and this ideology has given them that certainty and identity that was lacking. And then all that hatred and resentment they have to the world and that sense of victimization, they're able to now justify their malevolence and aggression through the means of, oh, but I'm helping the oppressed. And the other aspect in which I meant that quote was when they, or through their propaganda, or if they're talking to media that might be sympathetic to them, they'll use this kind of language. You know, for example, Antifa, when they used to wear the masks, their justification was, oh, we're wearing the masks because the far right might take photos of us and it's for our safety. When in reality, they knew full well they're wearing masks because they wanted to commit crimes.
Yeah,
but
it's obvious. It's obvious. Yeah,
it's obvious. But the justifications, yes, are there to try to hide the true intentions.
I think that's the biggest power of Marxism, because when you look at everything through the world through oppressors versus oppressed, then basically if you're oppressed, anything's justified because you're oppressed.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of similar to the crazy psychology of people who go on shooting rampages because they dwell on how victimized they are. And it's that sense of victimizing that allows them to go out and commit some heinous crime because, oh, I'm not the bad person here. They've done something horrible to me. And so that, it's very much that psychology embedded into an ideology.
So,
and I think that's why it's such a dangerous ideology because it's so insidious. You know, it's so insidious.
So I'm guessing because this all ended for you when you accepted personal responsibility for your own life, your own actions. I've read here. You got here. Hello.
I'm with you. Sorry, I just cut out a little bit. It all ended with me when I accepted personal responsibility. I think that's one way of saying it, but it was a process. Like when I first came out of it, like I was having like migraines and headaches, in that like I felt like my brain didn't know where I was because I was like reorientating myself completely. You know what I mean? It was
the red pill experience.
Like
it's waking up in the Matrix, and you're like, "Where am I?"
Yeah, it's definitely like a whole personality conversion.
We don't have to get into this if you don't want to, but I think your ex-girlfriend played a big role in it as well, if I remember reading it right. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I'm happy to speak to that because, for such a long time I was denied a right to reply to that, and I'm happy to answer any questions and talk about that experience.
So when you came out, one of the first things Antifa in Sydney did was demonize you, calling you a deviant. You have a history of sexual assault, erratic behavior, sexist douchebag, that kind of thing. And I think that comes from your ex-girlfriend. Do you want to expand on that at all or reply to that?
Yeah, so I was when I was first sort of involved in this anarchist movement, I went out with sort of one girl in the scene. And, you know, going out with a hardcore militant feminist as a dude is like being a Jew trying to go out with a Nazi. You know what I mean?
Hey, don't compare the two. Don't compare Nazi with... No, sorry, that doesn't apply, but go on.
Anyway, so... And that, so that sort of... As I was getting into this ideology, you know, I was sort of like, oh, men are these really bad people and we have male privileges and we have all this easy life in society that women don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And that would sort of come into the relationship to the point where like the most minor thing was blown out of all proportion. But I would accept the narrative that I was this bad person, you know? And it got to the point with the first girlfriend where, you know, we stopped sleeping together at all, but she would still hang out with me, and then she started becoming a sex worker and then would tell me about how they're all hotties at her job. And, you know, I think there's something deep and primal that is really upsetting for a man to hear that when they're feeling rejected by the person they care about.
Yeah, getting cucked is not a good feeling.
I cucked up real bad in summary. Like, I cucked the fuck up. But, so... Yeah, I became the ultimate cuck, right?
I'm sorry to hear that, but go on.
Yeah, it was really full on, man. And she would kind of break up with me and get back together with me, and It was this crazy chaotic relationship. And it's also that mindset of like she never had any responsibility for anything, you know what I mean? And like this whole microaggression, you know, like I remember once sitting in like in my own place I was paying rent for, I was like sitting down on the couch with my legs spread, like just relaxed, just spread out, chatting to people. She sat in front of me, right? And then she's like got upset that I'm showing her my crotch to her or something. Like it was just like the most neurotic madness. And then I just was so weak and pathetic that I would just kind of like, I guess I'm a bad person, you know? But it was a slow process, you know what I mean? It's like, it's step by step. You get into this really abnormal way of relating to people. And I never had that with any girlfriend before I got involved in the cult. You know, I had at least about 8,
Wow.
you know, mid to long-term relationships. Anyway, but the narrative of the ideology is like, oh, well, those women had internalized misogyny and couldn't stand up to my evil patriarchy or whatever. Anyway, so that relationship primed me to really get suckered in by the next person. The next person in the cult was a very young person with borderline personality disorder.
Oh, so these are two separate people. I thought they were the same people. Okay, go on.
Yeah, so I'm just giving the full context, right? Anyway, so the next person, that's when life turned to hell for me. This was so I was sort of started to see this girl at the same time as seeing the first one, because they believe in this kind of utopian polyamorous stuff. And again, it's all about freedom from responsibility. You know, it's like having your cake and eat it. Oh, you know, we can all just live in some, you know, free sex, free love thing where we have no, you know. Anyway, so I would sort of go out with this other girl with the BPD, and then the other girl would want to get back with me, and then I'll sort of break up with her, and then she'll break up with me, and then I'll get back with the one with BPD. And it was this crazy cycle. And
it's like a three-way relationship. It's like a triangle relationship with you in the middle, and you were like switching between the two.
Yeah, it was very chaotic. And so naturally, the BPD one, the thing about borderline personality disorder is they are super sensitive to any sense of rejection. So they flip out even on perceived irrational rejection, let alone real rejection, right?
Yeah.
So this BPD chick would just go into fits of rage where she'll be like kicking crates down the street and ripping posters down. Like, there's not many people I've been around where they get so angry that there's like, you can't reason with them. There's nothing there. You know what I mean? Just all animal. And she got like that, and you know, she broke into my house and spat in my face because she felt victimized because I broke up with her, right? Anyway, and then I decided that, you know, to leave Sydney, and I went to Brisbane for a few months, and I hoped that it could calm down and that I could just be in a relationship with just this girl, the one with the BPD, and that the reason that she was so chaotic and stuff was because I'd done bad by breaking up with her. Like, I accepted her crazy narrative and sort of like, I should have been like, no, that's crazy violent behavior. This person's dangerous. Get the fuck out of my life, you criminal lunatic. And then anyway, and so I went to Brisbane for a few months, and I was in there, and I was like, oh no, I'm this bad person. These women are upset with me. And then I went back to Sydney because I had a court case for my first charge for Antifa related for something that happened outside of a picket outside of Australia First Party's headquarters. And man, just crazy life. Anyway, so and when I got back down to Sydney, I hadn't heard this before, right? But I come back down to Sydney and people are saying that I'm a rapist. Now, when that happened, that really fucked with my sense of reality because, you know, I was so invested. I'm like, oh, I'm a member of this group. And then it feels like when someone says something like that, it's such a life-destroying thing because everyone, like, people care what people think about them. That's the worst thing for someone to think about you as, right? So I'm not much of a drinker. And I drank for like 2 weeks after that. Like, I was like bedridden in pain. Like my central nervous system didn't know how to process it. Um, Luckily, I was hanging out with two other people who were sort of on the fringe of this cult, and one woman who has actually gone through, sexual assault and stuff, and she didn't believe the narrative at all. She just thought she was just an angry, immature girl, and coincidentally, the one with BPD, she came to the house that she knew I was staying at, shared a spliff with me, and talked about a book I recommended, and then stayed the night in the room next to mine.
Like it didn't happen.
You do if you've been raped by someone.
Like it never happened, right? Yeah. That sounds like it sounds like bipolar disorder to me. Yeah.
Borderline. It's slightly different.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. People might want to Google that. If someone's got the symptoms of that, do not get involved with them. They will drag you down to hell with them. Anyway, so
or a sex worker.
Yeah, they're hyper. They can't. One of the symptoms is they can't delay gratification. So they're hypersexual and they're notorious drug users. Anyway, so she stayed in the thing, and I was so confused and messed up, and because I was in this cult, the cult believes the narrative that the victim's never wrong, and that they believe that by always believing someone who says they've been raped, that they're helping the universe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think people should take it seriously, but I don't think people should just become like judge, juries, and executors, right? Anyway, so I left. I went back up to Brisbane, and I was so confused because in that 3 months I was up in Brisbane, I spent a lot of time feeling that, I love this person and I hope I can get in a relationship with them. And so here I am still feeling like I'm infatuated with this mental chick who's done this awful thing to me. And, and it could be part of my psychology, that people pleasing thing that comes from low self-esteem as well. And so I was in Brisbane, and I was so confused because on the one hand, it felt so good when she wanted to hang out with me at this, when she came over the house after this thing. And then I guess in my mind, I felt that meant that maybe there was a chance we could work all the chaos out or something. I was so confused, and I really regret not talking to more psychologists and mature people who were more grounded. But
was she hot?
No one's that hot, man. No one's fucking that hot.
I don't know if they're hot, your dick kind of overpowers you sometimes, and you're like, yeah, I could just look over this some flaws in the personality if they're this pretty.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Like, the sex wasn't good. You know what I mean? But I think what it is with the borderline people is that, some of the psychological deficits that I think made me susceptible to ideological possession are also some of the deficits of why I would put up with that relationship. So with someone with borderline, what they do is they idolize you, right? One moment they idolize you and you feel really special. You're put on this pedestal. It feels great. And then the next moment they're demonizing you. And one of the things that makes addiction a thing is called intermittent reinforcement. So it's actually more addictive when something's only rewarding some of the time than all the time. That's how you get gambling addiction and poker machine addiction, right? So in that sense, that's creating a powerful psychological mechanism of one moment I feel amazing on top of the world because this person's treating me like a god, and then the next moment I'm Satan to them. And then because your brain wants to do the activity again and again because it's trying to understand how to get the reward consistently. That's part of the evolutionary driving factor that makes intermittent reinforcement addictive. And so, I was like, I can just, because I didn't understand borderline personality disorder. I'm like, I can just please them. And then, all these issues will be sorted out. And then it'll be like that good time all the time, realizing that it was all the effort, no matter what you do with someone borderline personality disorder, they're never going to be happy.
So what made it great? What made it great some of the times, but not all the times? Weren't your past relationships great all the time?
Sorry. So what made it great with this person is that they were idolizing me and looking up to me. The other relationships I've had before were more consistent.
Right.
So I didn't get these crazy manic highs of someone idolizing you. Like I've had loving relationships and that 6 months honeymoon period, which feels like all that good time. But I guess being sort of in this cult and sort of normalized in this weird dynamic with the previous hardcore feminist girl, I guess I guess I got lost sight of normality, because part of the ideology is that, oh, the mainstream society is all wrong, and it's almost like your brain kind of forgets your previous life almost.
Right.
So I wasn't thinking, oh, this is really unhealthy. I was thinking, because of the narrative of the ideology, the man is always guilty. I've got this male privilege because I'm a man. I'm really bad all the time, and so that belief added a lot of. It was definitely a huge factor on putting up with this crazy relationship, and then so I ended up communing with her online while I was up in Brisbane after this, and I felt so defeated and depleted. And then we ended up sort of talking on the phone and stuff, and because they're hungry for validation, the BPD people. And then we ended up meeting up in Byron Bay, and we had sort of 2 weeks hanging out together. And when I was back together with her after all that, like, I felt like I've never done hard drugs, but I felt like I was on heroin. Like, I remember just sitting there, just like looking up at her face, just like, oh, like it just felt so amazing. After that big low, after such a big low, to kind of, oh, it's all over now. This awful thing that I'm a rapist, it's all over now, and I'm with the girl that I wanted to be with, and it's all going to be fine. We're in Byron Bay, it's all beautiful. And she was mental in Byron Bay, but not that mental, And then we went up to Brisbane, and she stayed at my family home, and because and then sort of hung out with the anarchist scene in Brisbane, and then she decided she wanted to go back to Sydney, and then I went back to Sydney, and that's where hell really started, because I was, like the concept of a rape dungeon. I was in a false rape dungeon, right? So I was.
I don't know what that means. Rape dungeon is not a literal rape. What's a rape dungeon?
I'm just trying to make a joke that I was in a false rape dungeon.
Okay.
Right. So, like that, I was held hostage by that. So,
I'm not following.
I was in. Okay, so basically, what happened is I went down to Sydney, and I thought, surely this girl's going to tell people that I'm not a rapist and stuff. But then, the BPD people pull away, and then they come back and stuff. And I was like, look, okay, you felt that you couldn't say no during sex because I would break up with you. That was her rationality of why she was raped. Fucking insane, right? And then I was like, look, I understand that was hard for you. And then bit by bit, I just internalized this crazy narrative that I'm this evil person. And I stayed in this relationship where she would kind of break up with me every couple of days and then get back together with me, which is very typical of people with BPD. And then it was this thing where she'll break up with me, and then the other cult members, who a lot of them also have mental health issues.
Were you still in Antifa then? Were you still in Antifa?
Yes, I was in the anarchist subculture, and Antifa is one of the sort of
I'll just call
groupings.
Right, I'll just call it anarchist subculture then.
Yep. And yes, and so we were living in squats with these anarchists, and she'll break up with me, and then I would kind of be socially excluded again, and at the bottom of this sort of hierarchy, and sort of an outsider.
And a hierarchy in anarchy group? That's not how you do things there.
Yeah, it's almost like you live in denial if you don't think people rank each other subconsciously, Anyway, it was ridiculous. And then, there's so much bullshit in the anarchist scene. Like they think because they call themselves anti-authoritarian that they're not authoritarian. You know what I mean? It's like how it's the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea. Oh, well, I guess it is then.
I'm guessing it's very tribal in those groups. Like there's a natural hierarchy there that's based on almost like an alpha male, and it goes down, right? Maybe even females at the top.
Yeah, it's like an inverted hierarchy. It's like who the biggest loser is the biggest winner. You know what I mean? It's like whoever's got like the. I mean, there are cool kids and uncool kids, and it's like high school. actually, so before I got involved in the subculture, you know, I was young, I was naive, I was stupid, but I was somewhat functional. And then I felt as I got into this ideology, I regressed. My maturity regressed, and I felt like it went back into a high school stage. I think that could be a product of the ideology um, kind of atrophying the brain because you don't have to think, you can judge. You've got all the answers and you can apply the algorithm to reality. And then it's also people aren't relating to each other as individuals. They're focused on their image within the group. So people are trying to appease the group, and they're trying to do the behavior that will give them the most status for the group in this subculture. Well, in the normal society, we've got like networks of friends and stuff, but it's not this full-on high school thing, you know. And so there was very much a lot of gossip and bitchiness and yuckiness in this group. That, you know, but I was sort of in this relationship with this girl with BPD, and you know, she would yell at me over nothing, and then I would have to leave the house, and then I would come back, and because I didn't have the right facial expression, she would yell at me again. And like there were many times where I was like literally like she once sexually assaulted me because I came too early. You know what I mean? Like the only time I've ever had to lay hands on a woman was when, this is how mental it is. I came too early.
That's never happened to me. That go on.
Yeah, I came to like I'm not. If there's such things, you know, it's just mental, right? And then she would just flip out and go crazy, and then you know she was in one of her crazy angry moods, and she was yelling at me to come back into the room, and I was like, I don't want to. You're gonna hit me. And she's like, no, I'm not. And so I came in the room, and she pushed me onto the bed, and then she started like force making out with me, and I'm just there, and I feel, since I'm so beaten down, I felt like, oh, I deserve this. And then she like went down to grab my balls, and she started squeezing, and I had to push her off, you know. And then I'm she scratched my face because she slapped me, and like she used to hit me and stuff. And then I'm freaking the fuck out, and like I've left the house, and then she's there with her friend talking about what a victim she is. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I had to go through this shit for a fucking year, man. Like it destroyed my mind. And then being shunned by this group when she'll break up with me, and then back in the group when she'll get with me. And then the cult, who are like, oh, we're really staunch against rapists. Keep in mind, I hung out with these people for another year after this girl left to the UK. So for 2 full years, if they really believed I was a rapist, they were hanging out with me, right? So they're full of shit, these people, you know? And yeah, it's just because I'm an apostate now, they feel they can throw that out, and that suits their narrative that I'm this awful bad person, because they need to believe that, because it's so threatening to their ideology for someone to go through it and go, no, you people are racist and sexist and out of your mind with your identity politics. You know, so they need to believe the narrative that I'm this fucking crazy person.
I'm sorry I laughed before. You got really dark all of a sudden. I'm sorry. I feel really bad for
No, it is very funny in hindsight, and I can see the humor in it.
I don't consider female male
but at the time,
violence
it was
funny.
A fucking nightmare.
It would, yeah.
Sorry?
The worst thing about it is
that...
if
you don't laugh, you cry, right?
The worst thing about it is that society won't believe you. Like, they don't consider females a victim. Like, females can treat males like shit, and they can get away with it and call you the sexual abuser, and people will believe it because they're females.
Yeah, they don't seem to understand that, you know, some of what the feminists point to, again, it's they take one thing that might be true sometimes and they extrapolate it. Some of the stuff they talk about, oh, women, you know, are less likely to be thought as funny or whatever, there's some truth in that. They have no concept that in certain domains, men have it worse. Child custody battles, you know, if a woman's hitting you in the street, people don't stop. People don't care. They're like, oh, whatever. But if you hit a woman in the street, they're like, that guy's fucked or whatever. Not that people should be hitting women in the street, but I'm saying, like, I've heard stories of other men who've been assaulted in public, and then they've grabbed the fist coming in, and then everyone in the pub or whatever's turned around and gave him a dirty look, like, what the fuck are you doing to that woman? You know, and they don't speak to this. They have no conceptual concept of that.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest things. Female privilege is real. Well, male privilege is not real, and something that's addressed a lot. And it comes from the same cultural Marxist place, I think.
I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's, it's these broad concepts like female privilege, male privilege. All of these concepts and these broad generalizations destroy the nuance of the individual and the nuance of the specific situation. You know what I mean? And there's definitely tendencies that they can point to prop up the narrative that men have this amazing universal privilege. But yeah, it's not universal, and ugly chicks don't have the same privilege as hot chicks. You know what I mean?
They definitely don't. No, they're probably the worst. They get it the worst, I think.
Yeah, they have it really fucking hard. They don't get any sympathy.
Can we talk about the structure of Antifa? So you said you don't know humiliation until you've left the coat. I wasted 4 years of my life. And you said there were a bunch of people on the dog struggling to get enough money to rent out the space and run a bookstore. It's like extreme networking. So I get the idea that they're poor. They're the underclass. Is that right?
No. Like a lot of people in there were kind of brats from the middle or upper middle class, who I feel that, yeah, like some of them, like one of the leaders of Antifa in Sydney used to go to the same high school Tony Abbott went to. Okay. So that's like elite shit. You know what I mean? And like a lot of these kids, it was actually funny. One of the other ex-members of the Sydney Antifa group I'm friends with, who stayed in there like a kind of longer than I did, he got the shit bullied out of him, and they would make fun of him for not having an expensive laptop that their parents bought for them. So there's an element of kind of perpetual adolescence with these people. It's like this is kind of my analysis. So you would probably, most people get the idea of video game addiction, like people escape reality through this character. And I feel that these ideological things are almost like a form of role play. They get to create the same sort of narrative as the video game character. Oh, I'm this hero. I'm fighting, the fascists, who are just taking over society everywhere. You know what I mean? It's like they get as hysterical as like some of the right wingers get about Muslims. It's like that. There's a conversation to have, but it's hysterical. The narrative's like doom, like it's like the sky's falling in. You know what I mean?
They're LARPers.
And sorry,
LARPers, live action role playing game.
It is. It's like I call it unconscious cosplay.
That's good. Unconscious. Like they are cosplaying. They're wearing black. That's real cosplay.
Exactly. Like I used to look down on the kids doing cosplay.
I used to do that.
You fucking losers.
Hey.
Right, but now I realize that's way healthier, because at least those kids they get it out of their system, and then they go back to being real humans again, and doing things that they have to do. Like, but the thing is, it's like the more that they can, create this narrative that the far right is this huge thing, the more important they're going to feel. So not only does ideology make you blind, it makes you delusional. Where they all of a sudden think that someone with dreadlocks who's white is racist, even though like I don't know many racists with dreadlocks. Like there's a whole lot of neo-Nazis with dreadlocks, and then anyone waving a flag at a sports game is this crazy bigot. You know what I mean? It's just they project their reality onto the world, and they're trapped in their moral matrix.
Do you know if they get like any outside funding at all? Because I've seen a lot of these leftist posters saying Nazis off our street, and the signs are really designed really well and printed really well. And I know those things aren't cheap. Do you know do they pay for that themselves?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that the far right kind of always talk about how, Antifa is getting paid by George Soros and stuff. I think no. I think the ideology may be propped up by some of the far left leaning in some of the uni courses in terms of the osmosis cultural influence, but at the end of the day, they're ideologues who are mainly motivated by an ideology, not by financial reasons. And then sometimes they can get help by the Greens might give them posters, not because the Greens are necessarily, although some of the Greens members might be that hardcore into the ideology that they're sympathetic and think it's okay what Antifa is doing. I mean, I think media watch attacking me shows that a lot of people on the left aren't willing to call out their crazy, extreme, far left flank that is dangerous and totalitarian. But they would present themselves to the green. Oh, look, we're just uni students. We just want to do a protest against racism. And then the Greens people, oh, well, that sounds reasonable. When in reality, no, we want to create a violent militant movement, and we want to assault a bunch of people who are center-right because there might be someone who's far-right around that group. And we have this false narrative that we can't prove that assaulting the far-right stops them. When in reality, I think a lot of their action is the far-right.
Okay, good answer. I think George Soros, during the DNC leaks, George Soros did fund Get Up Australia. You've heard of Get Up Australia, right?
Yeah, like I think there's money going around in the upper echelon, but like when it came down to the anarchist subculture, it's mainly motivated by hardcore ideologues. Like there's no
so it's a real grassroots program. You're self-funding it yourselves.
Yeah, it's like, think about it like, one of those like David Koresh's cult. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't getting funding from anywhere. They were just loopy ideologues.
I can respect that a lot more then. Okay, I can respect Antifa a bit more for that then. All right, let's move on to the media and how
they're self-made crazy people.
They're entrepreneurs, yeah. The capitalists funding their own programs. So let's talk about your relations with the media. All right. So the biggest thing that came out was they featured you in news.com.au, I think, and the article was right wing. According to the article, you created this. You were the head of Antifa, right? The terrorist group?
Yeah, so the context of that article was I had an hour phone conversation with a woman who I met at a sort of liberal conference, like libertarian conference, because I'm, interested in free speech now. And, I wouldn't say I identify as a libertarian, but I think
Which conference is this?
This was called Liberty Fest in Brisbane.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that one.
So anyway, I met this journalist who, started talking to her, and I was interested in telling these libertarians, like, ask me anything. I've gone through this, and yeah, these people are wacky, and there is this culture of, slandering, censorship, violence, and threat of violence as opposed to debate. Like there's even like there's people who aren't anarchists who have absorbed this kind of feminist ideology who have that same mentality of like, oh, if I speak to someone, I'm endorsing everything they say, and which is it's a great cop out. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a great way to be lazy. You don't have to engage anymore. Anyway, I'm digressing. So I spoke to this journalist and I had an hour conversation with her, and she wrote an article based on the hour conversation. So some of the quotes you've said, yes, I said that to her, but she's condensed it down to make it digestible for the media. And so my actual statement to her was, yes, I was involved in setting up Antifa Brisbane that didn't exist before in relation to protesting Reclaim Australia. Yes, I was involved in the early days of Antifa Sydney. I taught the people how to use the WordPress and created the Facebook page. And I was one of the core organizers in both of those things. And then that's been boiled down to the founder, in which people have jumped on that and gone, oh, it's true, but it's true in a larger context. Obviously, Antifa, has been around.
The actual
before.
quote here is, Shane Hunter established the far left and violent Antifa movement in Australia. So I guess there's half truths in that. I guess you created the Antifa in Brisbane, and you might have
and like there's other half truths in that article. Like it says that they attack anyone right wing of centre, or something like that in that article. That's not entirely true either. They have attacked other anarchists for dissenting. You know what I mean?
I believe that, yeah.
Like they kind of hate their own more than... They spend more time bickering among themselves than they do with the people that they hate. Similarly, from people I've spoke to who've been affiliated with the far right in Australia, like people who know, Sherman Burgess and all that crew, they also have a similar issue where they just bicker amongst themselves predominantly.
I've seen this on YouTube, like the far left constantly infight. Like the Trotskyists fights with the Leninists, fights with the Marxists, fight with the left comms, fight with the Stalinists, and they cannibalize the young.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is, look, I think, there are cases of racism and sexism out there where, maybe someone is unfairly fired or whatever, and you know, but those things are hard to relate to when you say, "Oh, I'm trying to fight racism." You know what I mean? So these are, and they conceptualize it as this broad, crazy structural system, right? Um, and I don't think that's quite how reality works. And so because it's so hard to relate to their goals of, oh, we're trying to overthrow capitalism and fight the patriarchy, these are so hard to relate to and untangible that I feel as a substitute for that, they go into like a purity spiral and cannibalize each other.
Yeah.
So, for example, one friend of mine who was involved in this cult, you know, this person did a lot to like, this was one of the more functional people in there in terms of like, they were funding a social center based on running an art gallery next door, you know, and they were actually doing all the work to get the money, right? Which is something that was like light years above the skills of so many of the lunatics involved in the cult. She was also like a small brown-skinned woman, and you know, she set up like a squat and gave housing to a bunch of these addicts. So she's done so much stuff to this community, and yet they denounced her because there was someone who didn't go by the pronoun of he. They were now a they, and she didn't get the memo, and she went, "Oh, hey, how you going? You know, he's good or whatever." And so that's like this horrendous crime, and then they can all demonize her. I feel maybe the underlying psychology is maybe they resent her for being successful or something. And then the other thing is, it's like, well, this is hard to relate to real things, so we'll make up this made-up crime as a way to feel good about ourselves. So similarly with me, with, you know, oh, Shane's a rapist or whatever, yeah, let's relate to this made-up issue so we can feel that we're really virtuous. Oh, that person's got an Australian flag, they must be this crazy racist who hates everyone. Oh, let's abuse him in the street. Now we get to feel that we're relating to this thing. And the way that we get positive emotions is through relating to our, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but you could say it's meaning plus goals, and then relating to those goals equal positive emotion, right? So you feel good about yourself after you achieve something that's meaningful, right?
Right.
And so when ideology, say if you're nihilistic and you have a lot of negative emotions, then ideology can allow you to have that sense of meaning in the same way that drugs allow you to have that pleasurable experience. Ideology functions kind of like a drug. You get to feel that you're on this heroic mission and you're relating to it, and you get to have the positive emotion. So through that cannibalistic, the way they cannibalize each other, it's the way they almost feed their own egos. It's fucking disgusting. And it's no wonder that in the Soviet Union, you know, people go, oh, Stalin, if it wasn't for Stalin, Trotsky being there in the utopia, you know, and fuck off. Like, so many people within that system under the spells of that ideology were cannibalizing people. Oh, let's kill that person for glasses because that must mean they're richer than me, and it must mean that they're an evil capitalist, right? So let's murder him so we can feel good. So there's a very cannibalistic tendency when you have this ideology.
Yeah, I think reading those stories, what happened in Spain and Russia, it does sound like hell on earth, because it's like Antifa everywhere you look, and it's in the political establishment, and there's literally nothing you can do other than wait 100 years for it to go away.
Yeah. It's
All right. In this, you also quoted to say that these kind of ideologues and movements are worse than ISIS, which caused a lot of triggering there as well. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah. So I was sort of, I mean, that was a hyperbolic comment. I was joking around with the journalist.
Well, I don't think it's that hyperbolic. I think it's pretty accurate.
Well, you know, I don't think it's, you know, so basically what I meant by that comment is I meant that I was in the context of saying to her, look, this Marxist ideology is being taught in university campuses, and unlike ISIS, people know ISIS is a dangerous ideology that has, you know, it's an evil ideology.
Yeah.
People are aware that that's a problem.
Yeah.
People aren't aware of this ideology's influence. Thus, it's worse than ISIS. That's the full context in which I said that comment. And then, you know, in my defense against Media Watch, you know, I did try to remind people, hey guys, you do realize the same presuppositions of this ideology is also the same ones that led to North Korea, that's trying to make a nuclear weapon that has thousands of people in gulags that are being raped and murdered. It is kind of worse than ISIS in that regard.
Well, it is.
And
like,
the damage.
ISIS is based on Islam, and Islam has an ethos. There's an ideology in there, and it's from the Quran. And you can read the Quran, you can understand what they want, what their goals are to create an Islamic state, and fair enough. But when you go into critical theory, postmodernism, Marxism, what are their goals? Oppressor versus the oppressed. How can you build a society based on that? And the more you try, the more society suffers, like SSSR in Spain and so forth and so on.
Yeah, I think what happens is you know, yeah, it's that thing where it's like there's, you know, the right wing is more about order, the left wing is more about chaos. So it's like about borders, you know. It's like, oh well, you know, maybe having some immigrants is good. We get some new ideas, we get some more labor. Other times, no, those ideas can be bad, and we don't want to devalue labor. But when you go to either extreme, you know, the far left is like, there's nothing good about this society. We should have no borders. Every structure, no matter what the structure is oppressive. They're always trying to dismantle any structure. That's why they really hate marriage and the family unit, right? Because any structure is oppressive to them. Well, of course, any structure is going to have some element of rigidity. Otherwise, it's not a structure. But you can't just live in chaos, you know. And then the far right can go too orderly, you know, where it's like, no, we need this rigid stuff. We're not orderly enough, and both extremes can become pathological. And so I feel that the far left, unlike the far right, you know, which throws around ideas of ethnic stuff that the mainstream I don't think are ever going to buy.
Don't be so sure. Don't be so sure about that.
Radical. Well, I can't see that happening, but the radical left, you know, it's an easier sell. Do you know what I mean? Because we'll have a utopian thing, and it's like it's a prettier looking bird than the far right for people.
Okay, so that was Media Watch, and that was the article you appeared. Now let's go to the cancer that is Lefty Poll. Do you know Lefty Poll? You've heard of this? It's a board on 8chan.
I'm not a frequenter, but I've been there, and I'm a little bit aware that it's craziness.
It's cancer. It's I had a thread on you when I pulled out some good quotes after you came out. I think some of these are subscribers of yours or know you. They said, I knew Shane Hunter. Okay, the deal is he has some serious fucking mental issues and he's basically become alt-right because feminists criticize him on Facebook for basically being a sexist douche. He hangs out with actual fascists now, so it seems, he's being hyperbolic as fuck. That's in reference to your ISIS comment. Here's another one. He's gone fash now because from my perspective, a bunch of feminists were calling out shit he said and did on Facebook. I wasn't aware of the sexual assault allegations, but it wouldn't surprise me. The dude is fucking unstable as fuck and had serious mental health issues. I almost would say he was bipolar or something.
Yeah, so they live in a world of so it's kind of curious that these people who believe that there's such thing as non-binary for a gender, they have a difficult time thinking in non-binary. Like, you're either with this or you're against this. You're either alt-right or you're an SJW. You know what I mean? One
more quote, and we can sum it up. Also, right, cool. I'm not an anarchist, but the left in Australia is a bit small, so you run into people a lot. And Shane was someone I had a lot of contact with and talk shit with. It's really sad. He's really sad he's became fash now and is hanging out with fuck-staying neo-Nazis like Love, Life and Anarchy, because we hang out all the time, right?
Yeah, mate, we're just... this is the second time I've ever spoken to you.
Because he couldn't engage in self-criticism or get help for his mental issues, but what are you going to do? Yeah. All right, so... What do you think about all that?
I think a few things about it. I didn't even know that I was being denounced there, but I'm not surprised. So it's interesting. So back to my analogy where it's like a video game. Like, ideology is like this costume you wear, you know, a role play game. And it's like a video game. Have you ever seen the viral videos where like parents, they like they hide the modem or they break the kid's computer game,
Yeah.
and then the kid just loses their fucking brain
Hmm.
because they're like, no, ah! That's what it's like when you challenge someone's belief systems. Like you've taken the video game and no, it's time to be a real person. No, right? So that's how I feel they're reacting, and it's like another thing that's interesting is I remember when I was coming out of the ideology, trying to understand how the fuck my life got so crazy. I started reading a lot about psychology, and this one anecdote was really interesting to me where there was a shrine in India that started crying. It was actually a Catholic shrine. And then all the locals started flipping out. Oh, it's a miracle. And, people were coming, oh, it's holy water. Let's dab it on you, put it on our baby. A journalist from the city comes and who's, a bit more educated. And it's like, all right, let's investigate it. Hey, guys, did you realize there's just a broken toilet pipe here? It's actually shit water, right? Instead of them thanking him, going, oh, thank you for letting us know we're rubbing shit water on our wounds. And I thought it smelled a bit funny. And it was weird the miracle only happened when Gary was on the toilet. Hey, Gary, it's happening again. Quick, come off, But guess how they reacted when he told them?
They attacked him.
They wanted to kill him. Right? They wanted him dead. And he actually lives in exile in Norway because there's these stupid blasphemy laws in India. But so I feel it's the same psychological mechanism. Like quite a lot of people, and it also goes to show that there's another element of this ideology where there's a social element to it. Like I think a lot of people who might become really hardcore Christians, they might be struggling with their sense of identity and purpose in life. And then the religion gives them not only mechanisms for their own psychology to kind of hang on to reality, to anchor themselves, but it also allows for a social community. And I feel that is a big part of it. Is these are my friends. Wow, look at this big community. But in reality, it's a trick because in reality, they're loyal to the group and the ideology, not each other. And that's not how you build real social bonds. You know what I mean? And they're not your friends if you're only friends with them based on a crazy belief system. It's like a hate group, really. At the end of the day, it's just a hate group. It's another hate group, and yeah, it's no good. And yeah, I don't know who this fucking person is. It's just I've probably spoken to them as much as I've spoken to you. You know what I mean? Like I probably had 3 conversations with them, and also for the record, I am aware that Love Life and Anarchy has some views that I'm not hugely fond of, but I'm at the point now where I believe that talking to people is better than trying to fight a war because you get a chance, like dialogue, like dude, you're not gonna take over society tomorrow. Do you know what I mean?
Me, no.
So like it's just these hysterical narratives, like if you talk to someone, you endorse all their things, and that like there was actually a video of a guy, a black dude, who got a whole bunch of people out of the KKK, right? And he did that just by having conversations with people, treating them like humans, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the Australian Defence League had very similar politics to the Reclaim Australia. There was some leftist dude who went out there by himself. He just chat to them. And then there wasn't another rally for like 4 years after that. You know what I mean? So I regret not doing more to try to talk to the people at the Reclaim Australia rallies. And you know what? A lot of those people had a lower socioeconomic status than a lot of the people on the counter-protest side who were like more middle-class uni students. So who's the oppressed person here? I've actually got one of my stand-up bits that I did was I said all this white privilege and stuff. Yeah, okay, maybe. But a lot of the people at the Pauline Hanson rallies were missing teeth. What about tooth privilege? How much bigger do you think tooth privilege is in this society? And like, do you know how many times a toothless person has the same qualifications as a tooth person, and every time the job goes to the tooth person? And then the other interesting anecdote was when I organized the counter protest for the first Reclaim Australia thing in Brisbane. I've done a lot to set up the meetings, and people have corroborated that story in one of the interviews I've done. And so I was on the PA because I've done stand-up comedy. I'm fairly good at public speaking, right? But I made sure that I had all the right identity boxes that were going to speak. And I also did a lot to try and make it an open mic, because the left-wing tendencies for more inclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so, you know, I'm trying to get everyone to have their say on the mic. And there was this woman, you know, in the typical sort of anarchist punk looking get up I've never met before. She just mumbled, and I paid for the PA and I drove her there and all this shit, right? Never met her before. She wasn't involved in any of the organizing. She just turned up and she goes, I can't believe there's a white man on the mic. It's like, lady, if you want to see a woman on the microphone, look over my shoulder. Pauline Hanson is literally speaking right now. Okay? Okay, and through your moral matrix, the right wing is more progressive than us. You know what I mean? But I didn't say that to her. I just moved the mic out of my hand and I said, would you like to speak? And she said no. She said no. And then I continued. Right? Of course she did. Do you know what I mean? It's so easy to just sit there and complain and whinge.
I hear stories like that all the time, and I have to make the conclusion that it's never been about class, it's never been about privilege, it's not about race.
Resentment.
Yeah, it's just like, I hate these people because they're better than me. That's the only conclusion I've come to.
Dude, it's a big part of it is revenge of the nerds.
They're not even, I guess, no, because I'm a nerd. Fuck these guys. No.
Well, they're like some of the introverted, maybe, you know, not super social elements of a nerd without reading the book element, without the book reading elements.
I guess. I call them degenerates.
Well, you know, but look, at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that I feel that these people are almost victims of there's an addictive element here. They're like gambling addicts now in my mind. Like, I went through a phase of like really resenting them, you fucking pieces of shit. But now I kind of like, these people need help. Like, they're going to wake up at 35 and go, what the fuck was I doing? You know?
Yeah, it's when they do something
they'll get their own,
stupid,
they'll get
like
their own
shoot up
through that process.
Well, sometimes they just go far off in the deep end and shoot up a church.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that dude's beliefs were, but you know, I think that's actually the element of pathological resentment, is you get so resentful that the life itself has no meaning, and you want to take revenge on life. So there's been people of all kinds of extreme views. Like, when you get really narrow and rigid in your ideology, and you're driven by resentment, I think that's a factor for people who become Islamic terrorists. I think that's a factor for that young kid who shot the black church. I think that's a factor for that Black Lives Matter dude who shot those police. You know, I think they're driven by a powerful resentment.
Some quotes here as well. We're going to shift the conversation to. I'm going to assume someone who's from the far right. Okay, so you said in your article that Antifa would say there's nothing good about Australian society. Their minds project that belief, and everything is filtered through this ideology.
Correct.
Without a doubt, there's a huge and growing threat to Australian society. It's a miserable mindset. When I get out of it and stop feeling oppressed, I finally felt like I could take control of my life. That's what I intended to do now. Now, if I were to take up the far-right position, I would say that this cultural Marxism narrative has the goal of reshaping or transforming Australia into something that it's not. And we need to protect Australia by attacking these beliefs, attacking the people who espouses these beliefs, and physically remove them from Australia if needed be.
What I would speak to that is, I would say that the best way to beat them isn't by playing their game, right? So they actually recruit. I think that their methodology does a lot to make great recruitment for the far right. I feel that the far right people who might be tempted to become far right in reaction, and I feel like the far right has grown because it's cycles of resentment. It's like, look at these fucking people, and then you get angry at them, and then there's other people who are angry at them who are, you know, on the far right.
Are they wrong to be angry at far leftists? Because I think it's a healthy behavior to be angry at far leftists.
Yes, but my comment to make my comment succinctly is, I don't think it's good to play their game. Okay, their game is getting violent, getting angry in the street. I think the best way to defeat them is to not. That's fuel to them. They love that. That's then the more. I actually think subconsciously they want there to be a big fascist, white supremacist movement, because it validates their whole identity. Then, right? I think the best way to defeat them is by going, Okay, I'm done with the hominin attacks. Do you have anything to say? No. I'm going to talk to reasonable people who believe in dialogue. Blah 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 blah. That I think that's the best. If you play their game, then they get to have fun. And I
But
think their game is
that that
violence.
that didn't help
Is,
Andrew Bolt though. Andrew Bolt was walking around. Didn't help the right wing people who are attending meetings, and one of the people got a shirt ripped out. Johnny Abbott's daughter or sister, I think. They didn't help them, and they're willing to have discussions. What do you say about that?
well, look, I don't think I do think that if those people were to start playing those games, like if Andrew Bolt like organized people to go attack the far left or whatever, and you start to allow that principle for violence, and it can become it grows. I think it becomes a cycle, and like you get to the point where civil wars happen because of these divides that become more and more extreme, and where people are more and more likely to use violence to the point where almost this thing is unleashed that's almost like self-fulfilling, and it's an energy on its own, and it becomes a downward spiral. And I'm concerned about that. I think if people aren't illuminated and understand what this cultural Marxism is, and I feel that feminism is the biggest Trojan horse for it, because people are like, oh, I like women. Oh, I understand that historically women had it less, and I can understand in that realm women get it worse more often than not. And I think men have an instinct to want to protect women. Oh yeah, feminism, but underneath it, it's been hijacked by a sort of neo-Marxist ideology that's come into the mainstream, and that's happened because of the universities. But that is the biggest thing that I think people need to have a critique and go, this is not representing women. This is a far leftist ideology. And I think a dialogue and conversation through that, and making a lot of women and everyone else aware of that, and that also at the same time going, yes, that one issue that is a concern of that is pointing to. I also have that. It's like the trick religion plays. It's like, oh, if you don't agree with Christianity, you believe in murder because it says it's wrong to murder people in Christianity. So if you can point to underlying value systems underneath the ideology, because the feminist ideologues will go, oh, well, if you're not a feminist, you believe in domestic violence. It's like, hang on, you're doing a sleight of hand here.
These people weren't reasoned into these positions, though. Like, you weren't reasoned into the far left position. I remember talking with you, and it didn't change your mind. The only way you changed your mind is when you had this problem with your girlfriend, and then you had that shift.
No, I would say it's more complicated than that, because you have to keep in mind I stayed in this ideology after the girlfriend thing. Right. So it wasn't just the girlfriend thing, like, oh, that was a bad experience. But it's actually a big deal. Interesting. It's actually interesting. In the Gulag Archipelago, there's actually an account that's really interesting, and this is quite interesting to the mindset here. So people would be persecuted by the Soviet state and thrown into the Gulag, who were loyal party members who did nothing wrong.
Yep.
And in their brain, they still believed in the ideology, and they thought, oh, there must be an admin mistake. It'll soon get rectified, and I'll get out of it. And that this movement and ideology is great. And so all the people who were no longer a prisoner to the ideology were able to would play a game called Good Comrade, where they would go, oh, how good's the food, huh? Haven't seen a lot of food lately. And then watch the ideologue try and defend it and go, no, there's heaps of, you know what I mean? And so I was still in that mindset, was, oh, there's some bad people in this movement, but the ideology is good. Yeah. So that, yeah. So, how do you defeat cultural Marxism? I think be very aware of fueling their narrative. So when people go, oh, well, it is okay. We do believe that there's a white identity, and we're going to have our own identity politics now. We're going to do what you guys do and get violent and attack people we don't like. That fuels their narrative even more, and is a great recruitment for them to recruit people who are maybe naturally left-leaning into their movement. And I think the best way to defeat them is to go, look, you guys are crazy. You're attacking people in the center. You attack yourselves. And I think the biggest reform is going to happen is when people can get hold of the student unions at universities and get rid of and hold and shed a light to the cultural Marxist uni courses like gender studies, which is really pre-gone conclusion studies, And I think that will be the best way. I also think another phenomenon that might be another scary issue that I don't have an answer for, but it's interesting, is the way that social media allows for echo chambers. So people more and more get fed the same narrative, the same narrative, the same narrative. Because Facebook and YouTube will show you the feed that you want to watch, right? And over in time, again, you keep clicking on that rabbit hole, and so you're in every minute. It's like your phone. You look at your phone, and it validates your narrative, and that's a problem. I don't know what the solution is, but I would suggest people, I don't know, try to have a diverse political landscape on your Facebook group. Join left-wing groups if you're right-wing. If you're right-wing, join left-wing groups. And
I think you're underestimating how far this has already gone. It's not just in unis anymore. It's done through the established. It's done in government now. The Greens are implementing policies to enforce cultural Marxism. I've seen advertising agencies hiring people to meet diversity quotas to make sure they don't seem like they're impressive. Twitter is banning people who don't agree with their views. YouTube's doing the same thing. So when it leaches into government, education, social media, the digital industry, I don't know if conversations is enough, because we've been doing that for like 5 or 10 years now, right?
Well, I feel that this is true. I have these concerns that you do as well, at least in regards of far leftist ideologies contaminating the discourse and censoring free speech. But I also feel that we haven't, more than now than ever, and maybe this is because I've come out of the ideology, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm just being optimistic. Maybe more now than ever, there's more people who aren't, an ideologue, who are able to critique this stuff. The popularity of Jordan Peterson and Sargon of Akkad and other people who used to be quite left wing, like David Rubin and stuff, are sort of more popular now than ever. There's a market to make fun of these people more than ever, and maybe that's the process at which, through humor and ridicule, like Milo Yiannopoulos is probably doing a lot to kind of reveal to the general public just how aggressive and dogmatic these people are. So I think it's good that he's coming out on the tour. I think Antifa is planning on protesting him. They're going to show the public how stupid they are, and I feel that it's almost. I feel that if you try to win through like militant force, like if you start doing stormtrooper shit, I think it gives their narrative and their recruitment I'm not. I can't say for certain what the answer is, but I think there's an element in truth that a militant, aggressive response to them, rather than just laughing at them and trying to talk to reasonable people, helps their narrative. And I also feel that what they do helps fuel the far right, in the sense that the far right go, I'm constantly under attack, or I'm part of this huge movement now, because the leftists are constantly talking about how we live in a white supremacist society and that there's this huge fascist threat. Oh, maybe we now have this movement that can come to power, and we can have our own utopian vision come true, or whatever. And so I feel that the far left and the far right really fuel each other, and I feel that they have a tendency to do that. And I'm not sure trying to beat the left at its own game is the best way. I feel like you just calmly moving forward and is the best way to beat them, because they don't know how to respond to that. They hate that. There seems to be videos online where people are just talking to the Antifa people, going, no, what do you mean? And they find that way more frustrating that's harder for them to deal with than, say, Stickman. Because Stickman is great. I can get into a punch up. I can fight them. Next time I can go, like, we need more weapons now. Quick, we need to get guns now instead of just running around the street and sticks.
I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to reason. Like, I feel like I've done that enough on my YouTube channel. There's plenty of YouTubers who've tried reasoning with these people. I want to remove them from society because they're dangerous and destructive.
Well, first of all, what is in your power to do?
Well,
I mean, and when you say you, like, obviously you can't click your fingers and make these people go away, right? So what are you saying? You're saying that you want other people on the far right to get organized to push them out.
I want to unleash the cops.
Well, I think the cops should persecute these people a bit more. I think that they're too lenient on them. I
Right.
think that universities, yeah, there's a double standard at play. I think that, it's really unacceptable what happened to Andrew Bolt. I don't have to agree with everything, but it's fucking really, because Andrew Bolt is an avatar for how many people think like Andrew Bolt in the society? So what? The principle now is that you get to attack everyone who thinks like Andrew Bolt.
White
That's fucking
Christians.
ridiculous.
No, that's what they want to
Yeah,
do.
that's what they want to do, and it's not okay. And I think it is good that in Melbourne they have had a crackdown to a degree. It's no longer legal to wear masks at protests, and the cops did arrest people recently for that. So there has been, pardon me, a change of policies related to dealing with these people. And it's also sad because every time they make the state have to create an authoritarian means to deal with these people, we have to give up a bit of liberty to fight these extremists in the same way we have to give up some of our liberties for privacy in order to deal with Islamic terrorism. We have to give up other liberties to deal with some of the, it's not the biggest freedom to wear a mask in the street, but like maybe you want to go to a protest and not have your identity revealed. Well, you've lost that liberty now. Thanks, leftists.
Right. Well, I see leftists. The most dangerous part of it is denying race realism. So I see the denial of race realism another part of leftism. So in the cultural theory, they don't see females or males as different. They don't see capitalists and proletariat. They're different, but races are somehow all the same. And I think it's implementing our immigration policies to the point where some countries in Europe are facing the very real threat of white genocide. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, I'm aware of these narratives, and I'm happy to talk to them. I mean, I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I don't necessarily believe that all cultures are equal. And I think that countries.
Do you think races are equal?
I'm a bit more in the center. I think that, I think that certain. This is something that I have to be really clear about because I don't want to be misrepresented or accused of being a racist. But I think
I wouldn't want that. You could be an ex-Antifa, but you don't want to be racist.
Well, I want to have a balanced thing. But I did watch recently a interview with Stefan Molyneux and David Rubin, in which Stefan Molyneux was talking about some of the statistics around ethnic groups.
Yep.
And I also have heard that a lot of ethnic Jews have very high IQs. So if there's a group with a high IQ, then that might mean there's a group with a lower IQ. And then you get into conversations that get really uncomfortable because then people might go, oh, well, that means that this demographic are inferior. But what do you think about another thing that might also be true? What do you think about, say, IQ and ability divergent within an ethnic group is a bigger divergence between ethnic groups? So if I look at every Asian person or every Caucasian or whatever, there's some Caucasians with an IQ incredibly high, 150, and then there might be people, who are mentally retarded, like really low IQ, and that the variation between Caucasian people is a much higher divergence of abilities and talents than between actual races. What do you think about that?
I think that's valid. I think we just calculate for mean, which is what we do, and we notice that the deviations are different between races.
So my question would be to some people on the far right who might say, look, this ethnic group has a different mean. We don't want them coming in because we think their genes are inferior. Well, why have a policy based on race, and why not have a policy based on IQ? So maybe you only have people who can immigrate with high IQs.
Well, it's not necessarily just based on IQ. It's based on your ethnicity and race. People have a preference for their own race. I want to be surrounded by their own race. What's your background? Are you British?
I'm like mongrel Australian going back to Britain, and I've got a Serbian grandpa and a Serbian and a Polish grandmother on my dad's side who were post World War II immigrants.
Right. So you're European.
Yeah, you could say that my background is from Europe.
And do you have a preference for Europeans above?
Well, I could also have some like other DNA that slipped in there, like you know what I mean. Like people find out that they've got, you know,
Yeah, fair
because
enough. But
yeah. So
do you have do you preference your own race above others?
uh, no, because there's a lot of white people who really annoy me. Um, I mean, you know, the leftists would argue that I do. I have unconscious bias.
Like
Um,
I don't
so
consider that unhealthy if you did though. I think it's healthy to have a preference for your own race
and what and what's why do you think that?
because they're of your flock.
Well, but what if they're like a shit cunt and they smoke meth and they commit crime
But
versus the black dude who lives down the road who you get along with because you both are really passionate about neural chemistry or whatever.
well, that's fine, but you can still have a preference for your own kind. Like if they were
Right,
both,
but okay, so say you got these preferences for your own kind, but you know, let's say like a really hot chick walks in who's like Asian, like she's just like she's 10 out, like she's just amazingly endowed with beauty, and she also learned about her character and she was amazing. Like, wouldn't that trump an in-group bias? You know what? You know what is curious to note? A lot of the far right wingers um, have Asian wives, like Nick Folks and Ralph Seminara and stuff. So they have all this white nationalist, ethnic nationalist rhetoric, but yeah, behind closed doors, their misses are Asian. So I'm just saying, like, this, how does that all factor in?
I don't know. It seems antidote to me, but like again, I don't see the problem of having preference for your own kind and want to be surrounded by your own people.
Um, okay, but maybe there's nothing evil about it. But could it also be the case that if you make that the center of your ontology, um, that maybe it can become pathological?
I don't see how.
Like, so you know, like in Cambodia, in like Sudan, in Nazi Germany, there was sort of ethnic cleansings between different ethnic groups, to the point where the societies collapse because everyone's at war. And so maybe some of those tendencies you're talking about, the in-group preference for your own ethnic group or tribal group, can become so extreme that, you know, it gets to the point where no one can cooperate anymore and you're all just killing each other, and that becomes pathological.
I think multicultural societies have a bigger chance of breaking out into racial wars than a homogeneous society. I don't like it's odd that you bring up Nazism because people have a preference for their own race.
Well, that's what the Nazis had in their core of the ideology. Is that correct?
They wanted Germany for Germans.
Right. But the way they define German would be different from, say, a civic nationalist who would go, yeah, we want New Zealand for New Zealanders.
Yeah, right. Because Germans are native to Germans.
Yeah, but you know, even in yeah, but like I kind of feel like, you know, is there a middle ground? Do you know what I mean? So look, I'm willing to accept that some of the okay. So from my understanding, on the left, you have this obsession with like diversity quotas, that different skin colors automatically is great. Gender equality, like having 50% of gender of each gender in the same workplace is automatically gonna be good. Every culture is equal.
Mm.
So you know that seems like too far left for my liking, that I think's tenable. And then when I've had conversations to white nationalists and stuff, I feel that they get too rigid and they get too locked down. No, we need just this. It's dangerous to have anything different. You can't have any form of secularism because the divisions are too wrong, and that creates conflict. So we need all people to be homogeneous, and I'm not convinced by either narrative as being as an absolute of either narrative. I'm not convinced that they can't become obsessive and ultimately harmful for society, based on the idea that you throw out meritocracy on the left. There's no meritocracy. It's just like your identity group, and that's what's special about you, which I think is wrong. And then the right wing sort of have their own version of, you know, we can't have any other culture. We need a strict interpretation of this element of culture, and we need this strict ethno-nationalist, line or whatever. And so I kind of feel like it's about balance. Do you know what I mean? Like I would say that maybe some people look. I'm willing to accept the narrative that if someone's from Syria and they've been like head fucked and traumatized, or if someone's a Wahhabist Islamic person, they might not get along as well in society as, you know, the Polynesian people who aren't trying to impose their culture on anyone else and who are happy to accept the liberal framework of Australia.
I think you're overcomplicating this issue, because this was the norm before 1960s. I mean, even most of the people, it's only white countries that have embraced multiculturalism, while other non-white countries, such as everywhere in Asia and Africa, still cling on to having a majority ethno-state. It was only after the 1960s did we open our borders from white Australia to everyone. And this is only in the case of white countries and European countries. And this happened all at the same time after the Second World War, around the time the critical theory started to gain more prominence. So I see this as an offshoot to leftism ideas, and probably the most devastatingly destructive one.
Well, you know, obviously we had waves of Labor immigrants before the White Australia policy ended, and obviously the Chinese miners and stuff. But I think
there were riots from that.
Yeah, there were riots. That's right. Were those riots, motivated by just causes or not?
They were motivated by
I'm
working.
Not so sure.
The working class felt threatened.
Okay, so yeah, they did. So here's, because they're undercutting the labor market, so it's economic stuff that manifested through, ideas of race and stuff. Look, what about this as an idea? So, what about this as an idea? So, a lot of psychologists that I'm interested in, like Jordan Peterson and a guy called Jonathan Haidt. Have you heard of this guy? I hope I'm saying his name correctly. So he's another psychologist who studies morality, and he had some interesting ideas. So people on the right wing, their moral framework tends to be about fairness, right? So a lot of people who are right wing might not like the idea of refugees coming into Australia and getting government benefits, because they go, I've played in this game in Australia, I paid my taxes. Yeah. My taxes should go to me and the people who played the game before the out-group who hasn't played the game. So their moral framework is fairness, right? While the left-wing moral framework is more about compassion. Well, these people have been fucked over. They haven't had the chance to play the game. They should, be given a chance. It's compassion. And it's almost like these systems in the brain, some people might be more inclined for one than the other. But now that I'm no longer kind of left-wing, I can kind of understand the moral framework of people on the right better. And I feel that on the extremes of either flank, it's all compassion, it's all mercy. The victim's always right. Everyone needs to be model coddled. We need a safe space, no meritocracy, all diverse, open. Everything needs to be open. While on the right, when it goes far right and stuff, it goes, no, we need a strong meritocracy. You need to prove your work. We need people who are similar, because we see differences as chaotic and we need order to move ahead. We need orderliness. And their theory is that evolutionarily is that these tendencies would manifest in different tribes, because sometimes it would be advantageous for the tribe to bring in new DNA plus exchange culturally with the other tribe, because by doing so, you might get technology that's beneficial, right? Other times you could get a STD that wipes out your fucking tribe. So other times the right-wing tendency of like, no, we're our tribe, they're fucking different. Don't come in. Their culture is going to contaminate the order we have here. Um, we need to maintain the structures. So sometimes that right wing tendency can be correct, and other times it might be the wrong one, because that tribe might get wiped out because the other tribes have had a more
I think you're going off on a
open
tangent
policy.
here. It's not about any of this. It's just that people want to be surrounded by their own kind. I mean, this is the
Well,
case with the
not
left.
everyone does.
This is the case for leftists as well. Far left don't like right wing people in their group, right? They have a preference for their own kind. So what's so bad about having it based on race?
Well, yeah, I think that when you get to a left wing ideologue, it's true they don't want to hang around anyone who thinks differently to them,
Right.
right? I wouldn't say that's the case with myself. Like if I was hiring a business, as long as someone was able to do the job, I wouldn't care what their fucking beliefs are. You know what I mean? Like they could be an SJW, as long as you're doing the graphics design, Cheryl,
Okay.
you do
Yes.
your thing,
Yes.
right? So I guess I want to say it's technically true that everyone has these kinds of preferences.
So what's the what's like? I see a lot of whites are becoming a minority in Australia. Whites are a minority in Sydney and in Melbourne. In Brisbane, it's not the case. You guys are the majority there, and no one seems to be troubled by this, like being democratically replaced by people that have their own homeland. I mean, Chinese people have China, Africans have Africa, but Australians only have Australia. If we become a minority in our own country, we're fucked.
Well, I'm just trying to be honest with you. I know you think about this differently, but I think that I'm more interested in the maintaining the elements of the value structures that has allowed for a degree of prosperity and individual liberty, and that's somewhat balanced with things that I like healthcare. I like healthcare being publicly funded. Other people who I hang out with have different ideas about the state's intervention in the health sector. And for me, as long as the value structures are maintained, I'm happy. I'm less worried about like the ethnic interbreeding than I am worried about like SJW crazy authoritarian cultures coming in, taking over. I'm more concerned about Islamic terrorism and people who are really against the values that allow for the society to function and has functioned.
Even with Islamic terrorism, if we still had the white Australian policy, we wouldn't have Islamic terrorism here, and Arab enclaves in Bankstown and Yagoona.
That's true. I'm willing to accept that. Maybe some of the immigration policies were too far. Maybe they weren't. I don't quite know enough, but I can see what you're saying. That you're saying that the order and the structure would be maintained if people from different cultures didn't come in. But I'm also saying that maybe that's an unforeseen thing that people didn't anticipate.
That's the thing. I don't think it is. I think it's planned because it all happened at the same time by specific Jewish interests. And we're going into the JQ stuff now. I think there's an overarching plan to replace white people in their own homelands.
Okay. And how did you come to think this?
Well, have you watched my Jewish question presentation? You probably haven't, have you?
I was watching it last night, doing a bit of research. Yep.
Did you finish it?
I got about maybe 3/4 the way through, maybe, or halfway through. You were kind of talking. I got to the point where you were talking about, some of the historical stuff, and I watched some of the smaller videos, but I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing. Regrettably, it would have been good if I got to watch it all, but I'm here with you now, so maybe you can summarize some of the key points.
Well, the neo-Marxism, the attacks on man, masculinity, white people, race, it all comes from the Frankfurt School of Thought. Frankfurt School of Thought was established in Germany as a response to Hitler because people preferenced nationalism more so than class struggle. And a lot of Jews didn't like that, so they started their own school called the Frankfurt School, and that's where postmodernism came from. It's through postmodernism that it's creating all these far left problems, including immigration policies. Now, if you see footage from London, Sweden, some parts of Australia, you find there's a lack of white people walking around the streets. And I consider that a very deliberate plan by a Jewish ethnic community to replace white people so they don't embrace nationalism again and don't see another Holocaust or a Hitler coming about.
Okay. What do you think about the idea that um, so what about the idea that like there's a lot of Jews who are right wing,
They're in
right? Who
Israel.
really hate postmodernism and that kind of ideology. What if it's the case that Jewish people, because they tend to have very high verbal intelligence, and sort of a very academic kind of culture, that there's a lot of Jews that have a lot of influence societally, and that maybe this Jew's really good at physics, while this Jew happened to be really good at promoting a left-wing ideology.
Yes, they are.
Um, could it be the case that it's just sort of happens to be that Jews happen to be really good in a lot of different fields because that they have good verbal intelligence, and that it's just a byproduct of people who are smart rather than an overarching sort of plan by like a Jewish cabal to you know take down Western societies? Could it just be more that there's left-wing ideologues who happen to be Jewish?
Yes, there's left-wing ideologues that happen to be Jewish. The right-wing ideologues that happen to be Jewish are in Israel. And what's interesting about Israel is that it's a Jewish state, and their border control is very strict. They built a wall, and people can't be citizens over there unless they're Jewish, have the Jewish blood. Whereas other Jewish groups who don't live in Israel demand that we open our borders to everyone who's not white. So I see this as a big hypocritical statement.
It's just I so you're saying that, say if I moved to, I could never become a citizen of Israel. Is what you're saying?
To be a citizen of Israel, you have to speak Hebrew, you have to renounce your other citizenship, and you have to put Israel first.
Okay.
And you have to be accepted. You have to be accepted as well. You can't just, it's not open to everyone.
Okay, so there would be a path if I was like, I'm not Australian anymore, Israel's first, I've learned Hebrew and I've joined the faith, and my missus is Israeli. So there is actually a path for me to become Israeli.
Yes.
Right. So would, just to play, the other, tendency. Okay, so what if, could people not argue that, okay, well, in Australia, you also have to meet certain requirements to become an Australian citizen. You have to, this is what John Howard and Tony Abbott were all about. They were like, we want people who embrace our values to come here, and you have to meet these requirements, and then you could become, like, not anyone can just join any nation.
Yes, so that's how it was.
What's the difference? Okay, so what's the difference between, and I think you have to have a pretty good competence of English to become an Australian citizen, I believe.
Right.
And so, is that not comparable to the Israeli standard? And why is the Israeli standard particularly different?
Because there's two classes of groups. If you're a Jew, you guaranteed citizenship if you have a Jewish genes. If you're not Jew, it's much more harder for you, and it's up to their discretion. Even if you learn Hebrew, renounce your citizenship, you're still not entitled to welfare, I'm assuming, right off the bat. And I have to go into the clauses, but there's two separate. You get special privileges if you're Jewish, and you don't get special privileges if you're not Jewish. Now, what I'd like to see in Australia and other European-centric societies is have a high preference for white people, while non-white people have a much harder time of getting in.
I think, but that kind of is the case. Like from Europe, it's a bit easier. Like say if you're from England or New Zealand, it's easier to get through the borders and go through that process than it would be, say, if you're Indonesian. Is that not the case?
I'm not sure. But the way our demographics are going, it seems that most of our immigrants come from Asia, which includes China and India.
Could there be any benefits for Australia, say, 100 years from now, when, let's say, as time goes on, India and China become bigger and bigger global players, could there be any advantages Australia might have over European countries, that we have a mixture of people with a Caucasian background as well as an Indian and Chinese background that makes our culture, a better trading partner, and having a, trading cultural things, and have a more secure military alliances and things. Is there any benefits to that? Do you see, that you think could happen?
Not really. I don't think we need to be great friends with people or open our borders to be trading partners. And I think if there's a war between India or China, or Europe and India, and Europe and China, it will create a lot of racial tensions here, to the point where some of these ethnic groups could be sent to camps like they did in World War II with the Japanese because they were in the war. I think diversity creates a lot more conflict and mistrust towards white Australians who rightfully built and colonized and federalized the continent.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the case that, yeah, I just think it's that thing where, that's why when you said I went on a tangent, I just feel like they I'm not willing to say that it's always the right idea to have, a very narrow border policy. I think that sometimes in some eras, I think policies need to change based on the circumstances. And sometimes, if say our economy, some people might go, it's postmodernism and the Frankfurt School, which coincided with the end of the White Australia policy. Other people might make the narrative that we did it because we wanted more labour to build the economy, and that helped everyone.
Mm.
Um, so it could be this thing that certain policies at certain times, depending on what's happening in the world. See, that's why I think it's good to have a democracy. Is you have the right wing tendencies for order and the left wing tendencies to, move beyond the existing structures to create something that can survive in the new landscape. Because if you're too rigid and structured, you can't adapt, right? And so I feel that there's this tension between the two, and I guess that's why I feel that I'm more in the center now.
There's tension between left and right, definitely, but there's going to be tension between racial and ethnic lines as well if whites become a minority. Because in democracies, mob rule. And when you're outnumbered by different cultures, different religions who speak different languages, they're going to vote in their own best interest. And it's often at the expense of white people.
Okay, well, how's this for a thought experiment? Okay, so in 50 years' time, let's say we introduce your policies, right? We from now, right? And let's look at where Australia is maybe 50 years from now. So we only let white people come in, um, and we get a lot of white people, and maybe you can speak to how you think that will play out. Um, let's say in 50 years' time, you you kind of follow maybe some of the policies I'm looking at. I would say that maybe Australia going forward might benefit more from an identity based on the cultural values,
What culture
um,
values?
the kind of liberal values, the individual freedom comes first, a degree of economic freedom, um, and things like that. That it's different, say, than the cultural structures of China or India, where we have a secular society. We have a separation between religion and state.
You're talking
Essentially, we
about
have.
you're talking about political and economic systems. I'm talking more about cultural and racial systems.
Yeah, so I'm trying to separate the culture from the racial element. And I'm saying,
I don't
what
think
if,
I don't think you
what
can.
if,
I think culture comes
right?
from race.
Well, I don't, I haven't been convinced to believe that because I've seen, I mean, historically, so many ethnic groups, cultures have changed, right?
No, China still speaks
Like,
Chinese. What do you mean?
well, okay, in the Middle East, you had the sort of, um, the early stages of Christianity, that moved in. You had the Nordic people with their kind of runes that became like, the ancient precursors of English.
Right.
Um, you've got, trading with like tea and gunpowder with China, and so you've got degrees of cultural exchange
Yeah,
that happen to get.
that's trade. That's not cultural exchange. It's just trade.
Well, some people might argue that technology's changed culture, but I can take it or leave at that point. Um, but I would say that, okay, so from just the cultural thing, the religious aspects, the Byzantine Empire keeping Christianity when Rome collapsed, and then and that kind of came back, and then you had all the ancient Greek philosophy where people in the Greek, they're close, you know, to the, well, they're not quite Caucasian. Like, a lot of them have very tan skin and look could pass as Arabic looking, and then so we've got the philosophical suppositions of Greek culture coming back to Europe, when the Crusades are launched, based on a religion of a Jew, or what was meant to be a Jew hung on a thing. So I'm saying, and I'm saying that, like, in Japan, their culture came from, they had elements of Buddhism after Shintoism that came from an Indian guy hanging around the Nepalese India border. So I'm saying I'm not convinced. You know, People have to show me the information. I'm not convinced that race and culture are this intrinsically linked thing.
But you just said that when people mix together and exchange ideas, the cultures change. You just right? That's that what you're saying?
Yeah, but I thought I was making the argument that there's a separation between race and culture, because
But
ethnic groups can take on the culture of other groups if that culture is something that becomes popular. And so I thought that was in response to you saying that culture and race are linked.
some of the examples you used is that the the people from the Roman Empire became part of the other empire, right? When the Roman Empire collapsed, other empires absorbed those people. The Bensi Empire you used, I think.
Sorry, I was saying that the Byzantine Empire, which is near what Turkey is, held on to the Christian tradition.
Right.
And I'm also made the point that a lot of the Muslim cultures held on, that conquered Byzantine, had held on and captured, some of the philosophical ideas that were later reinvigorated the Renaissance. So it was when people were looking back at the ancient Greeks' work and stuff. And then the other example was Buddhism, which became a philosophy and religion that spread all the way over to Japan. Came from people who were ethnically, I don't know what ethnic group, but more Indian than they would be sort of Oriental, if that's the term. So I'm saying that because of these cultural exchanges between different ethnic groups, I'm not convinced of the narrative that race and culture are linked.
How about if they're somewhat linked?
Um, yeah, that if there's evidence for that, I'm happy to look at it, and if there's strong evidence, maybe I can see that that is the case.
Because Arabs and North Africans are mostly Islamic.
Yep.
And I think it appeals to that kind of race because they're low IQ and they're aggressive. They have like the warrior gene.
Yeah. Look, I'm not sure about what's going on there. There could be other factors, because with sociology, is like one of the things they teach you is that there's so many possible causal um, uh, things going on. So I think maybe some of the warrior culture, and it's interesting to note that Muhammad was like hanging around nomadic desert tribes in Saudi Arabia. So we know that chimpanzees behave more aggressively with scarcer resources. So it could
Yes.
be the case that in these areas that have scarce resources, you have a more aggressive culture, and that this totalitarian elements of Islam, or perhaps that orderliness that was required to, I'm not sure if this is the case, but it could be the case that some people might say that Islam was better than what was there before, where you had all these, very aggressive, constantly tribes at war. That Islam allowed for enough organization culturally, to allow for a development of civilization that was at a much higher level of sophistication than previously. Like the golden age of Islam, you certainly saw a much higher standard of living and boon, in culture, and that might be related to the monolithic and orderliness of Islam, that it developed in the context of scarce resources and warring tribes, and that they needed a very heavy hand, while in other cultures with higher qualities of resources or whatever, that they might have had a different cultural motif, um, because they didn't need the rigidness of Islam. I'm theorizing. I don't know. I'm just saying that that could be something worth considering as to how Islam came about, related to scarce resources in
So
a desert landscape.
you don't really see race as a big issue.
Um, I think it's worth trying to. On the one hand, I think people should maybe be able to come to terms with demographics, that there may be mean IQs and stuff. But on the one hand, I don't think they should run away and go, oh, well, the most important difference is race, because we also know that in between races, like you can have Arab and North African people have higher IQs than me. You know what I mean? So the variation between ethnic groups is also very high. That must be taken into consideration, and that as an abstraction, race as an analysis is something that I'm not necessarily going to have that kind of leftist position of like, let's never talk about it. But it's not the main abstraction for me. It's not the first level of abstraction that I see as the main factor for the strength of a culture or a society.
But what is politics and economics and individualism?
I think so. I also think there's circumstances of human behaviour that are related to the environment. Like Australia's policies are based on appeasing the global maritime power, because we're an export economy. So there's certain things that are related to geography that we also have to take into account, that might be more important than race.
What's more important? What's more important than that? Just trading.
So the reason Australia went to Gallipoli, and it's such a core part of the Australian cultural identity, I suppose, is that was a sacrifice we had to make to guarantee that it wasn't just because we get along with Britain, or that we're a constitutional monarchy. Australia's foreign policy is based on security guarantees to maintain our trade, our insurance that the dominant naval power will maintain our trading routes. And so in order to have that guarantee that they will protect our trade, we have to give insurances, such as what happened in Gallipoli, that huge sacrifice. What happened in Vietnam, what happens in Iraq. We have to do certain security agreements in order to prosper, related to appeasing the dominant maritime power. That is also a very important consideration for the strength of the society in Australia.
We got into all these wars to make sure our ships aren't fired upon by pirates.
Yes. It's something you can look. There's a lot of political scientists and commentators and historians and stuff who talk about that. You can, if people or your listeners are interested, that's something you just can look up in your own time or whatever. Or if you're specifically interested in that, I can send you some links on that.
Maybe. That doesn't seem like it's worth. I mean, if we export stuff, that means, what are we importing? Technology, I guess. Made in everything from China, I guess. I got to look into this as well, but that sounds right. Like, I thought we entered the war because we have ties with Britain, and they were doing it, so we were doing it.
Yeah, plus, that's sort of the narrative, isn't it? But it's also, we also have, like, underneath, like, we're not just hanging out with America because they're tops or whatever. There's also a harsh political pragmatism there that's related to, like, they're not just going to, like, give us favors. Like, we have to do something to guarantee we're going to get the benefits from the top dog on the planet.
What favors are we getting from them?
They maintain our shipping lanes, and they guarantee us that we have we can operate maritime, because they're the global maritime power. That's what the conflict all between the South China Seas right now is trying to assert themselves in a way, or aim to assert themselves in a way that they can go from a mono power to that they can also have power in the world shipping lanes, because China is incredibly vulnerable because if the US wants to destroy China, because they can't go nuclear, right? Because they both die. So all the US has to do to cripple China in a war or a conflict is go, shipping lanes are closed. Good luck running your economy, China. They'll have to just do a naval blockade. And that makes China very insecure about so China is trying, that's why they built that island in the South China Sea, and that's a big part of the geopolitical tension. And that's part of geopolitics is the way countries have to give guarantees to other countries to guarantee their economy and things like that. Other countries who aren't export economies, whose economies are based on something different, they don't necessarily have to have these kinds of deals, or their deals might be based on other things.
This is the first time I've I've heard about this. This sounds interesting. I'll have to look about this later. I've got my list. So basically, you preference politics and economics more so than race. All right, fair enough. Multiculturalism. So you're fine with multiculturalism?
What are my thoughts on multiculturalism?
That's a hot issue.
So when I used to be a radical left-winger, it was a conversation I would be like, any talk of that is just bigotry and closed-mindedness, because anyone who disagrees is somehow appeasing the far right, right? And now I think that, I think there's a harsh reality that, some cultures aren't all identical, because it's interesting to note, right, that because I listened to Jordan Peterson's lectures about the biblical series and the cultural motifs in Judeo-Christian traditions that may create a value structure for that culture to help it survive. So imagine if cultures, like the cultures that survive are more likely to have the ideas embedded in them that have something worthwhile, right? And that abstraction or way of thinking about culture has been very interesting to me. And so looking at ancient Norse mythology has been very interesting. I mean, it's not like they didn't have a Bible, so it's a little bit different. We have to go on ancient poems and stuff. But so their archetypical god, their dominant god, and I'd imagine their role model for everyone in society, particularly men, is Odin. And Odin's very interesting in terms of the stories he goes through and the trials and tribulations. So there's this big metaphorical story about how he had to basically sacrifice his own life to learn the magic of the ruins, right? So I would interpret that as a culture that would value learning how to write, and that if you make a big sacrifice and do a lot to learn how to read and to gain that knowledge, your culture is going to survive. So I think that I would like to see some of the right-wingers who are worried about the structural damage to the integrity of the culture that's got us here have more concern about the vapidness culture of pop culture. Like Kim Kardashian, as a role model to kids, doesn't embed any of the narratives that some of the ancient traditions would have with their religion. Do you know what I mean? Like watching Kim Kardashian maybe gives you this value structure that, that's the role model, just be a vapid cunt, right?
No, I don't mean like that, like TV shows. I mean like multiculturalism in Australia. So Chinese culture, Islam culture, English culture, Aboriginal culture, Greek European culture. I think that it's hard to say. I mean, there's some really big questions with the Islamic stuff. I mean, is it possible for Islam to reform and not take the Quran as literal, like the Christians no longer take their Bible as literal? I don't think so.
Or you have reformed forms of Christianity as well as really regressive, ultra conservative ones. It does seem that there are some Muslims who are doing that or trying to do that, but in the attempt that you got that Imam Tahidi, that's really interesting. The left seems to hate him, even though you would think he'd be their biggest ally. But they don't want to have any conversation about because they think in their mind that if we say that there's elements in Islam that are related to Islamic terrorism, then that fuels that narrative, and then the terrorists can recruit better. So let's not have that conversation or talk about it at all. Well, there's some people who are reformers of Islam or apostates of Islam who are like, no, it's all fucked. This is dangerous. You're being naive. And, I think that I have those questions. I don't have answers, but I'm willing to have these conversations. I think society needs to have these conversations rather than shutting it down and accusing anyone of having that conversation as being just this evil person.
Well, we can't. We
Well,
can't. If you
I
try to
think
have
other
this,
cultures.
if you try to have this
Sorry.
discourse in Australia, like if you, I've never seen Q&A even approach this stuff. As soon as you
Yeah,
open
it's a
it,
shame.
yeah, they just call you like a racist bigot and fire you.
It's a shame that the journalist institutions and the universities need to, even if they don't, the people in there don't think that way. They need to have the conservative position heard, because I do believe that society benefits from the dialogue and discourse. Because the way I think about our brains is like, okay, my brain's a processor, your brain's a processor. Your brain maybe you have better ways of thinking about some things in some ways that my brain can't do, right? And so the exchange and the dialectic between them produces an antithesis, right? And I believe that shutting down debate is something that I think is toxic, and that's why I'm embarrassed and ashamed that I was participating in doing that when I was in far leftist ideologue involved in Antifa. Because I believe our society's intelligence, we get stronger and better by understanding these positions, and because not only do you have to understand your argument, and because your argument will always seem reasonable to you, right? But you need to understand the reason in the other argument almost better than you understand your own argument, and people don't make that effort. Like, I was lazy in the sense that when I became an ideologue, I wasn't sitting in a library, reading one source of text, of one position, and then reading the counterbalance, and then trying to write an essay on both and go, oh, what do I really think about this? There's nothing rigorous that goes on here. People kind of go, oh, that Gian's right, that makes sense, that fits in with my personality tendencies. Yep. Anyone who thinks different's fucking wrong, And so I think that's a great shame, and I actually think that this Q&A stuff and the lack of conservative opinions actually drives people to the far right, because people get frustrated. Yeah. They're like, how come my sensibilities are never heard? How come I can't say what I think? And how can that not piss people off? And so that makes them more and more, well, I can only talk to these people with the people who think like that, and then they have their own echo chamber where they're not having, they dismiss all the, elements of a progressive position that might be worthwhile. And so, yeah, I think our society, one of the reasons I think America prospered is because they had the First Amendment, and I think that's a factor that allowed it to thrive.
I think America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, South Africa, they all thrived because white Europeans colonized them.
But would we have thrived if we didn't have the value structures that allowed us to have a free and open debate on a greater level than totalitarian societies?
I think those qualities are inherent to white people, though.
What about the lefties who are white who don't believe in freedom of speech?
I think they're brainwashed. I think they're brainwashed by outside influences.
Right. So yeah, I guess I feel that I'm just interested in that, those value structures and the software in our brains rather than the race stuff. But we've already had that conversation.
That's what I find the most concerning about this conversation, because
yes,
you're very quick to throw away feminism and communism, socialism through that process, which is great, but you still hold your people. You don't preference your own people more. You still don't have that idea.
Well, for me, I feel it's just the right-wing version of the left-wing's identity politics.
But I don't think it is. I think the outgoing, having in-group preferences for people that are not of your kind, is a left-wing position. It's not natural.
Yeah, you got to be careful when you throw around nature and stuff, because we all have different personalities. But
it's tribal. You're looking after your own tribe.
Yeah, but it's how do you define? Because the in-group is there's obviously been countries that have gone to war where you have many different ethnic groups, and you have many big civilizations that have existed many times. Like the Romans, for example, they were able to integrate other cultures into the Roman Empire because they would take all the people and they would go, okay, the first son of every family gets educated in Rome. Then after a few generations, they have the Roman value structure and they're indistinguishable. So the Roman expansion was based on cultural imperialism, I guess, and colonialism than it was on an ethnic ground. And I don't think they would have been as successful if they only had a a pure in-group narrative based on ethnic groups.
No, you're right, but it still was predominantly European. Like they weren't so open to Africans, and they weren't open to Jews, and they weren't open to Asians. From what I understand, I could be wrong about that, but they were still European focused.
Yeah, I mean that also might have to do with the age that they lived in. You know,
and their religion.
You know what I mean? It could have to do with their religion. It could do with the age. I mean, we live in a world that's more and more integrated. So the ethnic, the pressures for the economy, and just the transportation mechanisms are so much more advanced than in Rome that, you know, and I do think they did have colonies in North Africa. Like they conquered Carthage, right? They like absolutely destroyed. Like they did do ethnic cleansing, but they were only in cultures that wouldn't submit to Roman culture.
Sure.
And so, you know, but yeah, and you know, yeah, I guess it's that point again. Would they have prospered so well if they weren't able to integrate people in their culture? And the British attempted to do that with, you know, India and you know, and India today still has some elements of the British tradition based on the colonial history. And South African apartheid, you know, they did try to do that ethnic ground and structure it, but it did seem to create political chaos because you had all these resentful groups and stuff. And maybe a policy that they should have pursued earlier on is by trying to get, okay, everyone just point to the cultural structures rather than the racial one. We might be looking at a very different South Africa today. Although, you know, people might have counterpoints to what I'm saying that might be valid, but you know,
well, I think South Africa is probably one of the biggest countries that supports my claim because there's a lot of black and white fighting, and the whites are getting slaughtered by blacks that outnumbered them, farmers there.
Sure, but my point was that perhaps if that instead of having the apartheid based on race in the early days, if that the policymakers had tried to do what the Rome did and get everyone to submit to their culture rather than be excluded based on ethnic groups and not being able to climb social mobility, you wouldn't necessarily have the resentment and the situation we have today, which is an appalling situation.
I don't know if you can like get the native blacks people there to submit to, like, it's like asking the Aboriginals to submit to English culture.
Yeah, I mean, there were attempts to do that here in Australia, wasn't there?
Mm. Sorry, you're back. Okay.
Oh, just a bit of lag. There were attempts to do that with Australia with the stolen generations, to kind of culturally lobotomize and ethnically cleanse the Indigenous.
Yeah, and Indigenous cultures now, there's still, I don't feel like they've integrated.
No, I think I mean you can't talk in universals. I mean, there's Indigenous people who are far more successful in the social hierarchy of Australia than me. That I know who, you know, are more disciplined and get more money than me. But I think I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had that aren't simplistic, either left wing or you know, simplistic right wing narratives around the huge gap in living standard between the majority of Indigenous people and the rest of the rest of Australia. I think that's a situation that ideology gets in the way of, because you can't, like, oh, who's that? There's some woman who I met at the Libertarian conference who was talking about how the left wing's victim, you know, the victimhood identity and stuff really gets in the way of addressing some of these issues, because you've got huge rates of domestic violence in these issues. And the best way to help that is, like, these communities need to get clean. They need to stop substance abusing. They need to get rid of this. And we can't have that conversation because it goes against the victim narrative of the left. But the left thinks that they're helping, but they're not necessarily helping. Like I've heard Indigenous people, like this is coming from a lot of Indigenous people who are saying like we need more personal responsibility for Indigenous people. But with the question of multiculturalism, I think some cultures, I think it's interesting to note with. So I remember reading a policy where Irish immigrants in the United States. So in some places they were ghettoified. So this is the Irish suburb. You're less than us Irish scumbags, right? And so in those situations where they're more ghettoified, they had high rates of Irish gangs and criminality.
Yep.
While in some of the areas where the Irish weren't put into just the one suburb of ghetto, there was a greater level of integration.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an interesting thing. Is like, okay, so you got Lakemba. Is some of the issues between cultural exchange or, them rejecting Australian values or feeling like they're excluded and they go to some sort of culture that, causes problems in the future or whatever, could that be alleviated through by having zoning structures where you don't just have immigrants dumped into one suburb, but then you have interests where people are like, I don't want these people living in my neighborhood because it lowers the prices. All these things are just so multifaceted. But with the point I originally was going to talk about, the multicultural thing, is I think that you could make the case that some cultures can integrate into Australia easier than others. And you know what I mean? Like, I think that some people do, yeah, we're all down for that. We'll subscribe to the dominant culture, but we'll practice our subculture and we'll mind our own fucking business. And they've done that for 200 years or whatever, and there hasn't been any crazy, there's no, like, people aren't, like, heaps worried about Polynesian extremists, right? Who are motivated for religious reasons or whatever. But then, you've got these broader narratives that the Islamic terrorism thing has a relationship to the wars in the Middle East, which I'm willing to buy some of that argument, but I don't think it's all of it. So I guess in my thinking more and more, I'm trying to know that I don't know enough to have the certainty of going, this is what needs to happen. We need this policy. This is the way forward. But I do know that having the conversation with others gets us a lot closer there. And I don't believe in creating taboos around these conversations and go, oh, you think this? Well, you're completely wrong. And I'm not going to listen to you. And anyone who thinks like you should be demonized.
Well, that's what's happening to Richard Spencer, because a lot of this stuff comes from people like him. And people from Antifa and far left love punching people like him.
He wouldn't have a career, by the way, if it wasn't for Antifa.
I think Antifa did help, but he's still doing what he's doing, and it's not unique to him. There's other people talking about white nationalism all over the world, because it feels like it's something that was adopted by mainstream European culture and academics until it wasn't. And I'm not too happy about like raising if I have children in a multicultural community, because I was raised in a multicultural community, and it wasn't a great experience. I definitely prefer being around white people, and I think you see that in Australia. Like, the communities are segregated. I think.
Okay. Can I ask some questions on that?
Go ahead.
So I've met a few people who have said things like, I went to a school with a lot of immigrants, and they rolled me, and I was a minority there. So if you were like a white minority in a area that was dominated by first generation immigrants or whatever, who also got issues with poverty and integration or whatever, that it's easy for that person to buy, like for that person's more likely to go, yeah, white nationalism makes sense to me, than in the same way that one of the crazy feminists, like just batshit crazy, part of the reason I think she got really hardcore into that way of thinking is because her dad tragically was violent with her mum, and that's been a huge emotional impact for her. So, what degree do you think that um, that those experiences at the time did look like when you were a kid growing up in these areas at the time? Were you like, did you kind of have these kind of ways of thinking about things, or at the time you didn't know, and then you kind of got introduced to the ideas of kind of white nationalism or whatever that made you understand your experiences? And can you speak to
Yeah,
how?
I spent first my two sides of my youth with my mum and my dad. With my dad, I lived in a multicultural area, predominantly uh, mostly Arabs and Europeans, not necessarily Anglo Saxons or Australians. And when I moved in with my mother, when I was a teenager, I moved to an Anglo Saxon area. And Anglo Saxon area was definitely better because they're nicer and it was a more homogeneity society. Now, when I've moved to Melbourne, Melbourne is still a multicultural area, and I am in a minority here, and it's depressing to go outside and see it in my eyes and feel it. It's like seeing Mandarin posters everywhere and not seeing my own kind anywhere, and being a minority when I really shouldn't be. So, like, what I want to do now is move back to regional Australia so I can be surrounded by white Europeans and Anglo Saxons. And I think Australia would be a much more stronger, a more unified, safer, and economically richer place if it was a ethnically homogeneous society as it used to be before the 1960s.
Okay. So yeah. So So do you have a lot of friends who aren't white?
I do, yes.
And how do they feel, or what kind of conversations do you have with them about your sort of political views? And
Um,
how does that play out? And do you feel that they're your mates or whatever? You must like something about them and spend time with them or whatever.
um, well, most of them, I don't talk about my political views with them because they're not interested in that. They have a different interest subset. But I'd be prepared to leave them and for a new white ethno state. Put it that way.
Right. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, you're welcome to have your views, but I think, yeah, just yeah, maybe it'll be good for you to go to these rural areas and see how it all plays out.
Yeah, definitely. I'll stop by and see how. Maybe I'm just romanticizing my youth a bit more because I definitely
Yeah, well,
prefer.
it could be.
I
I
definitely
haven't.
prefer to be
Sorry,
around
go on.
Asians than like the far left white people. So that's challenging for me. But I definitely prefer to be around like conservative white people than I would with these Asians, basically. So like I have a preference list, and being my own kind is high on that preference list.
What do you think about albino people?
Albino? Who?
I'm just joking. I'm mucking around there. Sorry. So, look, maybe we could have another chat because I got a little bit of work to do, and it's been fun chatting to you. Is
That's
there any
fine.
more questions you would like to have in this session?
That was the last one. But like this position I have is to you far right position, right?
Um, yeah, maybe. So I've heard some people argue that it's far left because it's like collectivist or something, but I think it's definitely within the context that the radical left is about pulling down structures and the radical right is about really hardcore structures. So from my understanding, I'd say that it is a pretty far right position,
Okay.
from my understanding.
Well, that's sad. Well, okay. So what are you gonna do now for life? Tend it. What's
Pardon
your
me?
goals now? What's your goals now for life to end this on?
My goals life is I actually, you know, want to instead of I think with the ideology and stuff, it was a way of kind of escaping and kind of dealing with some of my problems. I think I've got issues with self-esteem. I've got issues with organization. I've got issues with you know being there for my family and not just self-interested. And trying to apply that, and unfortunately, you don't get any validation from any kind of group for doing that. Like that is something you kind of have to do on your own, and I think that's the real heroism. You know, I feel like, you know, a lot of, you know, Islamic terrorists or whatever. Oh, this is a way for me to be a hero. I'm fighting for the X cause or whatever. I feel that these other things are more authentic, but harder, ultimately harder to do. So I'm looking forward to making these changes in my personal life. It's very hard to do because you have to unlearn ways of thinking and behaving that were adapted in, you know, your formative years, and then you have to challenge that to become a better adult or an actual adult. So, like a trans person transitioning from a woman to a man, I feel like I'm transitioning from a boy to a man. I'm a boy trapped in a man's body.
So you're cleaning your room.
And
You're doing a lot of clean rooming. Room
lot,
cleaning.
lot of clean rooming. I think, you know, do that, get that sorted out, and ultimately, once you do that, you have a better position to come at things politically if that's your passion. The other thing that I want to do is commit artistically and comedically. People, your listeners might be interested in this. I strive to do a weekly thing called the Radical Centrist, where I try to make fun of both sides and myself. And you know, like I talked about the free speech thing with the gay marriage thing um, recently, and other things like that. The other thing that I hope to do, I'm doing shows at the Melbourne, Brisbane, and Sydney Comedy Festival. A show about addiction,
Oh, really?
the war on drugs and psychedelics, which I'm quite interested in. My mother was a heroin addict. My cousin and my father have gambling problems.
You're just
So
laying on this me now? Oh my god. I think that's where all this comes from.
yes, I think a lot of this has to do with troubled childhoods. I think that yeah, just laying on it now, I could probably look. You know, luckily she's not a heroin addict anymore, and I think for a lot of people whose parents were addicts, I had it a lot easier than others. But it did create an unbalanced
Yeah.
mindset, I think. And then the other factor is what I like to do when I have time. Two main projects I hope to do over the next 5 years. One is I would like to do a comedy series or whatever. People might not think it's funny, but it might just be interesting to some, about all of our cognitive biases and logical fallacies. I'd like to start doing shows on that because I feel without that insight into self and how the brain works, I think ultimately politics can be fruitless without that understanding. And it's something that I wish I had a better grasping on before I got into, like, really take, because you kind of know of it, but you don't take it to heart. You know what I mean? And then the other thing is, I would like to set up walking tours, comedic walking tours, and then a video series about the history of each city in Australia. So looking through all the abstractions, you know, maybe talking a little bit about, you know, the First Nation cultures, but then talking about early settlement, talking about all the tensions, and then all the different political movements all the way up to now, and sort of doing a series for each city in Australia, because I feel that the cultural narrative in pop culture around Australia and that sense of identity is very obscure. On the one hand, you kind of got the shallow, oh, meat pies, Vegemite, you know what I mean, and that's not it. Um, and then you got, you know, the left wing thing is, oh, there's nothing good about Australia. Sooner we fucking abolish it, the better. So I'm trying to bring out those different stories that will incorporate hopefully left and right wing narratives of the history, and try to examine it without, you know, just having it there rather than trying to angle it to any particular ideological point of view. So that's what I'm hoping to do, as well as making money and finding a wife and having kids and teaching my kid not to be a fucking idiot like his dad was.
All right, thank you so much for chatting with me, Shane. It was really enjoyable. So much enjoyable than the first one that we've had. You sound like a completely different person now. You sound like a man.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed chatting to you, and I like talking about politics. Even if, you know, it's good. It's good. And so the other thing is, I know that you want to edit this, but if you're interested, if I could have the complete version upload on my channel, I would like that. If you could make that possible for me.
Yeah, that's fine. Have you recorded it on your end? Or do you want me, I don't know if I can send this.
Sorry?
Have you recorded it on your end?
No.
Because we've been talking for like almost 3 hours now. It's a big file.
Well, what if you just strip the audio to make it smaller, rather than the video, and that might be more manageable to put in a Dropbox. That
yeah,
should
okay. I can do that.
under.
Yeah, that's fine. I can do that. I can just strip the audio. All right. Thanks, Shane. Have a good night. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, cool. I'll see you around. Take care. Best of luck with it all.
Bye bye.